Well, 2013, and we have before us the study session. We'll just go ahead and have our roll call.
Commissioner Smith?
Here.
Commissioner Roth?
Here.
Commissioner Mom?
Here.
Commissioner Pauly? Here. Mayor Neely?
Here. First item on the agenda is future agenda items. I have one. I would like to explore, I just learned this word, social hosting ordinance. And what this is an ordinance that sets up and makes it illegal, which it probably already is, but I don't know if we have a formal ordinance about it. Social ordinances, hosting is an ordinance that would fine adults that host parties at which alcohol is served to juveniles, and they're referred to as a social hosting ordinance. Oregon City apparently doesn't have one, and I'd like to have a study session to look at that particular issue, if that's okay with everybody.
Oh, yeah.
Okay. So, any other suggested future agenda items? Hearing none?
Well,
Go ahead.
I have one, and it's kind of it's a study item.
Okay.
And that's looking at the entire fleet of vehicles eventually going natural gas. Just as we acquire new things, looking at doing that. So,
Okay.
okay.
Okay, very good. Any others? Okay, we're going to have a discussion about a right-of-ways use ordinance, and speaking to it will be it's coming from our city reporter, from Nancy Ide, but you're going to be hey, how are you?
Yes, Mayor. This is and Commission. This is Nancy Werner. She's our franchise attorney.
Yes.
Has been helping us with our franchise agreements for many, many years, and she's here this evening to explain the right-of-way ordinance to you and answer your questions. And I'm just going to turn the whole thing over to her.
All right, thank you. Good evening, Mayor and Commissioners. Thanks for having me here to talk about the right-of-way ordinance. I understand you've had some discussion with this as part of your goal setting, so hopefully these concepts are familiar to you, and so I'll go through it fairly quickly and stop me if you have questions, but otherwise I think there'll be time at the end to have questions in the discussion. So I just wanted to start with some background just so everybody knows what's going on right now. The current practice in Oregon City is to issue franchise agreements to utilities that have facilities in the right-of-way. And what I mean by that is telecommunications companies, gas and electric companies, cable operators. They all have franchise agreements and pay franchise fees, or are supposed to have franchise agreements and pay franchise fees for use of the right-of-way. The city also charges franchise fees to its own water and sewer and storm facilities as well. Your code has specific requirements for telecommunications utilities, and by that I mean it's a long ordinance that describes everything that's supposed to be in a telecommunications franchise. So the only thing that is really negotiated there is the franchise fee. Other utilities, there is a requirement in the code that says you have to have permits and a franchise agreement to operate in the city, to install facilities in the city's right-of-way. But there's no detail beyond that. So what the current practice is for gas and electric and for cable is you negotiate from scratch the entire franchise agreement. And as I said before, the franchise fee is negotiable, but though if we talk about it later, there are some state and federal law limitations that guide what the fees are. So here's just a list of your existing franchise agreements. And I point this out mostly for the column on the right, the expiration dates. There are multiple agreements that are expired and have been expired for a long period of time, and Nancy Ide and I have been working on getting those renewed as quickly as possible, but we have issues. Sometimes it's just a delay on the provider's end for whatever reason. Sometimes it's just really an inability to agree on acceptable provisions, and that's part of one of the things we want to address with the right-of-way ordinance is to not have all of this ongoing negotiation for years. I'll just point out again, with the incumbent phone companies, those are the main phone companies. They have a slightly different legal standard that really isn't relevant for our discussion tonight, but I separated them out. You have about 5 competitive phone providers right now operating in the city, and they have franchise agreements. Most of those are fairly new, and they're 10-year terms that expire in 2020 or 2021. And they have a slightly different revenue model, again, based on a state law that limits what we can charge to your incumbent providers. So the incumbent providers are paying the maximum amount we can charge under state law, and then the competitive providers are paying a percentage of revenue, or $2.75 per foot, and that's per foot of utility space in the right-of-way. And one of the reasons for that per foot fee is there are several entities that pass through Oregon City but do not serve any customers here. So if you just charge them 5% of their gross revenue, they'd pay zero. So that's the alternative way of dealing with that issue.
So can you explain that phone thing again? Incumbent is?
The incumbent primarily here is CenturyLink.
Okay.
That is the company that was the original monopoly phone provider. It's gone through many different names since then. But the concept is there used to be these monopoly providers, and the state would be carved up with these monopolies. And then there's legislation nationwide to introduce competition. And so we're still, decades later, operating under this incumbent versus competitor model. Okay. And typically the incumbent is going to own, they're going to own facilities in the city. And by facilities, as I use that term throughout the night, I'm talking about lines, cables, wires. I just tend to use the word facilities. They will own facilities typically throughout the city. Not Beaver Creek, you have just a little portion of Beaver Creek, as I recall. But again, based on the old way it was laid out. Competitive providers, there really are 2 forms of those. I mentioned the 5 competitive franchises you have. Those are entities that also own facilities in the city, but they typically don't go, up and down every street like CenturyLink does. Right. They might build specifically to 1 or 2 customers, or as I said, some of them just travel through. They don't even serve customers here. Mm-hmm. And some of them may own some of their own facilities, but then also lease facilities from CenturyLink or another company. Okay. And then there could be also, we'll talk about this a little bit later, there can be competitive providers that own no facilities in the city at all. They just lease lines from CenturyLink or somebody else, but they're providing service in the city. So they do not fall under the current franchise requirement because they don't own the facilities. Does that make sense? Yeah.
Clear as mud.
That's what I was afraid of. But basically, I think the most important thing to remember is right now the way it's set up is if you own facilities in the right-of-way, you need a franchise and pay a franchise fee. Okay. If you don't own facilities, we don't know you're out there. You don't pay anything. You don't do anything at all. That's the current model.
Okay.
Okay. So what we want to talk about, again, what was brought up in your goal setting is an alternative practice that moves away from franchise agreements to an ordinance that requires licenses. This model that in the packet that you received is based on the League of Oregon Cities model right-of-way ordinance that they put together for cities to use as a sort of up-to-date way of managing the right-of-way rather than doing individual franchise negotiations. And that really is the key difference. What the model does is says, all of you folks who are currently have franchise agreements, so the owners of facilities in the right-of-way, we're not going to negotiate one-on-one anymore. We're going to put all of those provisions in the code. You, as the commissioners, if you go this route, will decide what you think the rules should be for use of the right-of-way. And you put those in the code. And then every utility, once their franchise expires, will then get a license. You won't negotiate provisions with them. They come in and they apply for a license, and the license is granted. The license basically says, we agree we'll comply with the terms of your code and pay the required fees. And it gets signed off by the city, probably the city manager. Could come to the commission if that's your preference. But it's just a much more streamlined approach, and then everybody is following the same rules. And I'll go into it a little more detail in a minute. But you can see from this slide, the things that would be in the right-of-way ordinance are the same things that would be in the franchise agreement. You really are just putting a franchise agreement, a standard franchise in the code, and everybody's going to follow the same rules. That's the main point of it. One exception is with cable operators. Federal law requires that they have a franchise agreement, and there are some unique things like PEG, the public education government channel stuff, that isn't going to be in the ordinance. That it does need to be individually negotiated, but all of the construction standards would still apply to the cable operators. Okay, so why are we here considering this? Again, it's one of the commission goals. One of the things I think you talked about before is the cost and the time. As I mentioned, we've got a lot. There's a few already expired franchise agreements that have been ongoing negotiations for quite some time, and it costs a lot of money and a lot of staff time that could be spent doing other things. And Nancy Ide and I worked on we estimated the costs for the last 5 years at $249,000, which is a higher amount than I think was brought up at the retreat because we added in the last couple of months that hadn't been included, which was significant. So it's to me a fairly significant cost for all these negotiations. And the flip side of that is you get a more level playing field when everybody has the same rules. So when you're negotiating franchises, you're negotiating. So there's give and take, and you end up with a different franchise agreement for all the different providers, other than telecommunications, because their stuff is already in the code. Right. So they follow the same rules. But for the other providers, you can have different rules, and that can be very difficult from an administrative level, because if you're doing a public works project and facilities need to be relocated, you've got to pull each franchise agreement and see, okay, what did we negotiate 20 years ago with PGE? How do we have to give them 30 days notice, 60 days notice? What is it? And then you've got to pull the Northwest Natural franchise, same kind of thing. It's just, you can end up with a patchwork, and I think it's an even bigger potential problem if you look at street restoration. Those standards can change, and if you've got a franchise that's a 10 or 20-year term that didn't require as robust of restoration standards as you do now, you can have a problem where you've got multiple providers, one of which has a newer franchise and was required to do what the public works folks would do in a restoration, and someone else gets to do something that was a standard 20 years ago. So this again puts it all into a level playing field. Everyone's doing the same thing, and it also is going to help with some of the compensation issues. You could have problems with expired franchises where technically the franchise fee that they pay for you as rent for use of the right of way isn't in effect. Usually they keep paying because they want to make sure they still have the authority to be in the right-of-way. But you have some issues there where you have expired franchise agreements, and that's where the fee comes from, is the agreement. It also, we'll talk about this in a minute on the next slide, there are some entities that are using the right-of-way without paying a franchise fee. And this is a way to level the playing field there and make sure that people who are providing services using facilities in the right-of-way are paying a fee to compensate the city for the use of the right-of-way. And we estimated that could result in over $250,000 of revenue a year based on the providers we know who are in the right-of-way now without paying a franchise fee. And there may be others that we're not even aware of. And adaptability, I mentioned already. Basically, like I said with the restoration standards, those things change over time. And with this, you can come in and you can amend your code and say, all right, now this is the better way to do restoration. We're going to change the code, and that's what everyone's going to do. Similarly, there can be technology changes, and you might remember updating the telecommunications ordinance a year and a half ago because it was an outdated definition that didn't apply to some of the new services that are being provided by certain companies. So those are the kinds of things that you'd be able to do here and make sure that they're going to apply to the utilities in the right-of-way. So now I want to talk a little bit about the proposed draft that was in your packet. Again, the license would apply to any facility owner. So you can think of the license as the equivalent of your franchise agreement today. It's the authorization to install facilities in the right-of-way. It's something that everybody who owns facilities will need.
So would the franchise fee go away and it would just be a license, or you would have both?
The franchise agreement would go away and you have a license. And when the franchise agreement goes away, instead of the franchise fee, they would pay a right-of-way usage fee. So you have all the same things, they just have new names.
Okay.
And the license obviously is a new procedure. It's not a negotiated document. It's a license. So yes, once a franchise agreement expired, so you're going to stick with the franchises you've already granted.
Right.
And then once those expire, they'll come in and get a license. and follow the code.
Okay.
And then they would pay the right-of-way usage fee, which I'll talk about in just a second.
Okay.
Okay. And one thing I do want to mention is in the model ordinance in the draft that I prepared for you to consider, it does allow you to grant franchise agreements, so you could decide to do that, and then that provider wouldn't have to follow the code, at least to the extent that it was changed in the franchise agreement. So I already mentioned cable. You want to do that. You're going to grant a franchise for the cable operator. But theoretically, there could be reasons why you feel like a utility just can't comply with the terms of the code, and you grant a franchise. I haven't seen that happen, and to me, the idea is the code applies to everybody, and if there's something that doesn't work, it probably doesn't work for everybody, and you should change the code, fix that problem for everybody. But, it does preserve that authority so that you're not, you have some flexibility if you feel like it's necessary. A new aspect to this would be registration for service providers. So this will be for companies that do not own facilities in the right-of-way, but they serve customers in the city. So I mentioned earlier there are some competitive phone companies, for example, that use another company's facilities to reach their customers in the city. They don't own anything here. So they wouldn't be subject to the current franchise requirement. And they wouldn't be subject to the license requirement either, but we'd ask them to register so that we know who's operating in the city and who is providing the services in the city.
Absolutely. That's very important.
Yeah, because we've had a lot of discussion about not really knowing who's out there and who's doing what, and that is a step toward understanding that. And there would be a minimal registration fee. We're proposing $50 just to cover the administrative costs of processing the registration and tracking all of that. So that is something that's new. And then compensation, again, we're going to do a right-of-way usage fee, which replaces the franchise fee. And the rate sheet, the kind of draft rate sheet that we proposed, has the same rates as in the current franchise agreement. So nothing would change in terms of your current franchisees and what they're paying. One thing that, there are a couple of additions though. One is that the right-of-way usage fee is designed to apply to any person, company, entity that is using the right-of-way to provide services to customers. So it would apply to those competitive phone companies that don't own facilities in the right-of-way. And here's why we are proposing that. If you think of, let's say, CenturyLink, your incumbent phone company, let's say they have, 1,000 customers in the city. Obviously, they have more, but let's just keep the numbers easy for me. They have 1,000 customers in the city. They are required under federal law to allow competitive providers to use their lines to reach customers. So another company could come in, lease CenturyLink's facilities, and take away 100 of those customers. So now your franchise fee from CenturyLink is based on only 900 customers.
Right.
And the competitive provider isn't paying anything. Under this model, the competitive provider is also going to pay on those 100 customers that they now have. So the idea is that it keeps the city whole for the most part when you have these competitive providers. And it's also a level playing field issue because now you have a competitor who also has to pay for their use of the right-of-way. Right. So that's the purpose of that, is that you make sure that everyone who's benefiting from the use of the right-of-way is going to be paying for it. A second thing that we put into this proposal is an attachment fee. The attachment fee is aimed at any entities, and we don't know if there are any, but in other jurisdictions it has come up that there are wireless phone companies that own antennas that are sitting on top of PG's poles, for example. Right. So they have facilities in the right-of-way, but they don't have wires. They just have these wireless antennas. And if they have those antennas as currently proposed without the attachment fee, they would be paying a percentage, probably 5% of their gross revenue for having one or two antennas in the right-of-way.
Right.
And, to be perfectly frank, that would be a tax or a new fee on wireless. They would call it a tax. I would call it a fee. And that can be a very controversial issue, and the wireless industry has been very vocal about trying to oppose those. So at the staff level, we were thinking, we're not trying to go there. So with the attachment fee, you can say, if you happen to have these poles, you're going to pay an amount for each antenna you have on these poles, but you're not going to pay a percentage of gross revenue, and we're proposing a $5,000 per attachment fee. So again, it really is just a way of saying we're not trying to apply this to wireless to be a revenue-based fee on wireless providers. If there happen to be any who own facilities in the right-of-way, they would pay an attachment fee. So that's the idea there, and obviously that's just a proposal from staff, and that can be addressed in multiple ways if that's not something you're interested in. And I mentioned with registration, there's a nominal registration fee of probably about $50. There would also be a license application fee of about the same thing, again, just to cover the costs of having to issue the license and track those things. So with that, I'm sure there are questions.
Let's switch off and see what I got on the list here. Commissioner Mum.
Okay, well, I have a list of questions, and it may not just be for you, but it could be for staff also. But I have learned a lot about franchise fees lately. It's been very enlightening, I have to say. One thing I want to kind of keep in mind is that we don't want to, not be a welcoming city to business, okay? So that's one thing I always want us to keep in the forefront. We do need to, everybody needs to pay their way, which I totally am in agreement with, but we just want to be still open to business, welcoming businesses to us. And then I was kind of wondering, how many franchise fees do we currently have, is a good question that I had. And do we have a franchise fee with Willamette Falls Access because they're a public? So is that different? So that's a question.
We don't have a franchise agreement with Willamette Falls. There was an agreement. We were more or less the owner along with West Lynn.
Right.
Now they are a nonprofit, and the city will be having a contract with Willamette Falls
because
for their services.
Okay, so it's like a different kind of...
Right, we're in transition this year, so by
Let
about
me
6
follow
months from
on
now.
the question. Do they have their own lines in the right-of-way?
I don't
not
think
sure.
I don't think they do.
I think they use Comcast's.
Yeah.
Okay.
I do think they would be a service provider, so they would fall under this new, under the new code that is being proposed here. Probably, I think we just have to look at it a little closer. If, for example, because they are truly a nonprofit, and if we have contracts with them, there's also still the option of having a franchise just because they get the PEG funds. We use the PEG funds for that, and I think that's pretty important. And that makes them unique. And so that might be a situation where you would issue a franchise just for that.
Just for
limited
that.
use.
So it'd be
Right.
a case, kind of case by
Right.
case. Okay. Okay, so then, let's see here. Now I want to go to the actual right-of-way that you sent. Okay, now on page 2, section 5, under definitions, you've written down cable service. Does that include anything called dark fiber? Or should that be specifically spelled out in the definition?
The definition of communication services is the relevant definition there. It talks about facilities for voice, video, data, which would include, and it's written in a way that it's services provided for the purpose of those voice, video, or data. So you don't have to be the person providing the voice, video, or data. If you own facilities that are available for that use, it's covered in the definition of communications.
Okay, I just want to make sure. And then I did see in here you had mentioned aerial, I guess is what you had called it previously. Does that need to also be explained a little bit more? Because we are going to charge from pole to pole, correct?
Primarily, the franchise fee or the right-of-way usage fee under this will be the same as the franchise fee, many of which pay a percentage of revenue. So it's not tied to how many links of facilities they have in the right-of-way. For telecommunications providers, a lot of them do pay per foot.
Yes.
And that would be set up in the fee resolution, and you were provided a very rough draft of that. So what we do if we move forward with this, this establishes the authority for the right-of-way usage fee, and then you do a resolution, and we would spell out specifically how you calculate that per foot fee.
Okay. I just want to make sure that's in there somewhere. And then, let's see here. If somebody wants to go, I have to go through my notes here for just a second.
Well, Carol Pauley, do you want?
I think Kathy's first.
Oh, excuse me, she sure is, Kathy. I'm sorry.
Well, my one question that was important to me was how would this affect the dark fiber with Clackamas County? How would it
It would apply. In terms of the definition of communications, it's very similar, if not the same, as the existing definition in your code. So it does not affect the fact that the code now and after this would apply to dark fiber if it's used to provide or allow someone to provide services to customers in the city.
Okay.
So
Nancy, also, I might add that when you ask how it affects them, I think they're going to be affected the same way. But if I were them and I was trying to negotiate with the city currently, what this really does is it takes away the staff obligation to negotiate one-on-one the individual things. So if you've got a long-term agreement or you're about to close a deal and negotiate an agreement, and you want to be exempt from the requirements that the commission sets out as the standard level playing field, the only way to really get exempt from that would be to do a deal before this all goes into effect.
Okay.
So,
this may help us.
We'll probably be bringing this up in a future discussion with the county because, as you know, we're still working on that, around resolving that. We've got some more information for you about our meeting yesterday that we can share in executive session. But neither they nor anyone else would be exempt under this, and our hope is that I think we were pretty modest in our assessment of the cost because just in the last 18 months on that one franchise or lack of it, we spent over $100,000 just on that.
Yeah.
So for me, administratively, when your highest paid people are spending 20 or 30% of their time, and then we had commissioners yesterday who took off work. We had mayors and other commissioners who took off work before. I mean, and that's one franchise. Now, these models, I mean, there's a reason the LOC crafted this model ordinance, because a lot of cities are going through this thinking every single time. I think government works best when it makes sense, it's consistent, it's fair, and it's reasonable. Well, if you just think about the number of staff turnover and commission turnover, when you negotiate and you have all of these, so much discretion for every deal to be different, every deal is going to be different. And then when they start negotiating with us, they will pick and choose the best provisions from the best deals that someone else got, and they'll remind us, well, I want this part of the deal you made with this provider, but I don't want this part of the deal you made with this other provider. And I mean, it's a nightmare administratively, and it doesn't make any sense as far as collecting reimbursements for the public expense of policing, paving, maintaining the right-of-way in all respects that goes into the general fund right now. It's a very large expense. We have almost $1.6 million a year in franchise fee revenues that go into the general fund that provide things like police and public works and other critical services. So if we were running government like a business, this is something we would have done 10 years ago. I mean, I just think it's wonderful that we're doing it now, but we have learned a very hard lesson in the last 18 months. And it's kind of unusual because typically providers simply don't refute the city's home rule authority to charge a franchise fee. I've been in this job, not here, but in this profession a long time, and I've never seen that happen. But when it does, it can be very expensive. And so I'm just really glad that we're taking this thing on and dealing with it.
Absolutely.
I have one more question, and this is more to clarify what you mean by a provider. But I've seen these ads on TV for go to Walmart and buy this thing and plug it into your wall, and you've got a new provider that's not going to cost you anything. What is that a provider that's coming through our wires?
Question.
That is a very good question.
Yes.
I'll be honest, that is something that we have to look at and address, and I think there will be ongoing enforcement questions like that, because it will depend on the arrangement and whose wires are going into the home and things like that. But we will have those questions, and that's one of the reasons this ordinance makes sense, is because as these things come up, we can review the language and say, is this a provider? Do we want this to be a provider? Do we think this company should be paying something? Which facilities are being used to make this happen? And so I think it's a good question, and honestly, without knowing more about how it works, I'm not sure. My initial thought is they would at least they would probably have to register, and they would probably be subject to the right-of-way usage fee.
Yesterday, when we met with the county, right before that, Nancy and our team met here at City Hall, and we had the county's website up on our screen that showed all of the different providers that are now said to be either using or about to use or interested in using the county's dark fiber. And this, by say using it, I mean lighting it or using a portion that is lighted. And when we looked down this long list, I mean, there must have been 20 different entities on there. And I think, had only had agreements or had any communication with about half of them. So and that's just what's on the website. So this registration piece, I think, is really important, because we've learned from the hard experiences that we've had that not knowing what's in your right-of-way is really a problem. And as technology has gotten more and more complicated, and especially Oregon City's geographic nexus, if you will, we're sort of where all this stuff happens in the county, and we like to be the center of attention, but this many different pieces of technology coming into our city and going on all these different places has really been an eye-opener for us about I think this ordinance gives the commission and the city and the citizens a chance to get a handle on this thing and manage it under best practices, which is, again, something I wish we had in place, 2 years ago or even more. But I think, anyway, maybe there's some additional questions, too, that we can help with.
Carol.
Yeah, saving money, time, and resources is always a good thing, and I like the structure. It'll provide consistency is good. My question is, since this is the recommended approach by the League of Oregon Cities, has it been used in other cities, and what's been the reaction of the companies in those cities?
Thank you for bringing that up. It has been used in other cities. Some of them have used this model. Some have used something similar to this model, the license type approach. Portland is moving toward a system that's like this. Gresham, Tigard, Sherwood, Newburgh, Grants Pass, Sandy.
They already have, or they're just moving?
They
towards
already
that?
have.
Oh, they already have.
Yeah, and there's not been a reaction like a lawsuit saying, you don't have the authority to do this. There has been some reluctance among the utility companies, the current franchisees, because I think they like the negotiation. They like to be able to try to convince you to do something,
feel like they're getting a good deal.
Something the way they want to do it. And there's some concern about the idea of treating all utilities the same. Obviously electric and gas and phone and cable are different. My view is that they are very different, but you can craft an ordinance like this that applies to all of them. Because it takes into consideration their differences. And, you can say things like you need to have the proper clearance between the different utilities. You don't have to specify everybody, that's elsewhere in other state regulations, So you don't have to specify the clearance for electric facilities. You can just say clearance. That's one example. So I have not yet seen anything that convinced me that you can't do it this way, that you really need to account for the differences in the utilities. If I had seen that, I don't think I would be sitting here today recommending this approach. So there has been pushback, but it has been much more on the, I guess I would say, political level, having discussions with councilors and commissioners and trying to explain why the franchise model is preferred to the license model.
So
But
is it safe to say some companies, since the franchise fees are really negotiable, that some companies would pay higher or lower with this model because it's consistent?
The way the proposed rates that we gave you would not change what any franchisee is currently paying. And for most of them, there are caps in state law or federal law that cap how much you can charge them anyway. So I don't think the fee is really the concern of the companies that are less excited about this model. I think it really is the other construction type requirements rather than the fee. Now, as I said, there will be some competitive providers and other entities that are using the right-of-way now without paying that may not, as we've experienced, that may not be happy about being subject to it. But in terms of the current franchisees, I don't think the fee is an issue.
There are current users, though. I mean, we need to, I think, be honest about there are current users, and we've talked about at the staff level about trying to phase in this impact for them so that they have a year or so to budget for it. And I'll give you some examples. Wes has major lines in the city that aren't paying a franchise fee. CRW has some lines that are not paying a fee. The city of West Lynn has some lines that aren't paying a fee. Ironically, they're negotiating right now with Lake Oswego to get $5 million for the use of their right-of-way. So if they're successful, I'll probably remind Chris of that over lunch. I think our fee will be a lot less.
I was going to say, it's not $5 million.
Keep our
Go
fingers
for
crossed.
it. South Fork Water Board as well.
Yeah, and this, I mean, we just need to be ready for what those impacts could be, what those phone calls could be, and I think we want to be very reasonable at the staff level and in implementing what the commission wants us to ultimately accomplish.
Absolutely.
And try to be fair and work out the kinks. I mean, it's not going to be all of these entities will and do. In places where they do pay franchise fees, they do pass those on to their customers.
Yes.
Now, Wes has a big customer base that's even more than just the Oregon City, and so arguably then that whole customer base would pay franchise fee for whatever cities charge them.
Yeah.
And so you're spreading out that cost instead of having your individual citizens pay for it in your general fund. So there's a lot of practical business sense behind the approach.
Thank you.
Well, you brought up the item, one of the items I had written here. We've been talking, the examples we had presented so far have been cooperatives or commercial entities. And now we brought in the publicly owned utilities. And these will be dealt with in basically the same way.
That's the proposal that we put forward. I think we pegged it to what the city's utilities are currently paying, 6%.
Mm-hmm.
And then a minimum, I'm sorry, what did we propose for the minimum? $10,000? $10,000 is a minimum for entities that don't have customers in the city. So the idea was to treat them the same, basically, as the city utilities. We put in a proposed minimum annual fee, again, because some have no revenue, and so they'd be paying something for use of the right-of-way, but it's not $5 million. It's a much, much smaller, what staff was thinking is a more manageable fee, but still represents some compensation for the fact that they're in city right-of-way.
I'll throw another one out. Actually, when we were negotiating with Union Pacific to establish our train station, they required us to close off a couple of at-grade crossings. But it was discovered that the city had right-of-way before Union Pacific did on one of the streets. And I presume we still do. That's 17th Street crossing. And I don't know if any of those streets that are in Kenema that Union Pacific goes over are in fact have senior rights over Union Pacific. So
Union Pacific would owe us a franchise.
Well, I'm just throwing that out as a possibility.
That could be very interesting.
That's right, it could be.
Yeah. Or is that a can of worms you don't care to
It's
open?
a can of worms, because there are, and
Federal law and railroads are.
yeah,
These aren't just regular words.
I wouldn't
they're
bet on
not
that, I guess is what I would
As my
say.
civil procedure teacher taught us in law school, when you deal with railroads, all rules are off.
It's true.
Exactly, so, it's an interesting question, but my guess would be,
We'll just keep it academic, right?
yes.
Yeah.
Then back to Commissioner Mum.
Okay, on page 8, number C, number 1, performance bond. Can you explain that?
Yes. Can you tell me which section you're in?
Let's see
Oh.
what section.
Section
it's
8,
just-
construction and restoration.
Thank you.
Oh, thank you, Bill.
Yes, okay, so the performance bond is something that is in a lot of your current franchises. The idea is that the utility puts up a bond at the beginning of the term so that there is a fund there that you can access if you have any issues with their performance under the franchise, or in this case, the license. So, for example, if they dig up a street and don't repair it, and you say, come on, you've got to come repair this, and they don't, you can use that fund to pay, so you go fix it yourself or get a contractor to fix it and then reimburse yourself out of that fund. So it's just, it's security to
like
make
a
sure they
deposit.
do what they're
So
supposed
it's
to
a
do.
lump of money that they give us. And they currently do that?
They don't give it to us.
They don't give it to us?
No,
It's a
it's
bond
held
that
by
you
a
can
surety.
buy.
It's a bond, and we would have to have a cause of action
Okay.
to a court order, basically to take the bond to satisfy the liability.
Okay. So another one I had was the inspection, and that was on page 9, number F. Okay, then also, if you go to the next page, number 2, utility operator shall, well, first let me back up and do inspections. Okay, this is sounding like it's going to be a big tracking device. So what kind of staff impact will this make for our current staff? Who's going to track the liability insurance, who's going to track and investigate and make sure they're actually doing what they're supposed to be doing? And, what kind of a budget impact is that going to be?
This is not going to be any change from the staffing level that we're doing right now, because this language is taken from our current existing franchises. And if you read that closely, it doesn't say the city must or will inspect on any particular schedule. It just gives the city the right to...
Well, if you go to page 10 that I have under inspection, number 2, utility operator will or shall meet with.
Right.
I would like to make sure that that is done annually myself.
That's what it's in here.
But it doesn't, it says you shall. I would like it to be you will meet with all of the different.
Shall is
Yeah,
the most
It's not
compelling
say.
way.
Yep.
Yeah.
Okay.
Typically, the distinction you see is shall and may. And may is it might happen. Shall is supposed to be mandatory.
Okay, all right. And then, okay, so that's great, because I think that's important that we keep track of who's working in our city and what they're doing.
And there are already permit requirements for, and if anyone's digging in the street, they should have a permit. And then you have that as a tracking device as well.
And we're not proposing to water that down at all.
Okay.
In fact,
Okay.
we think it'll be stronger because when they register,
Yeah.
we will have a heads up that they're operating in the city.
Okay.
And then if we find one of their facilities and they're registered but they don't have a license, that's when we say, uh-oh, you're registered but you don't have a license and you're doing more than just passing through, you're building something. And so we'll have multiple places where we can get a handle on what's happening in our right-of-way.
Okay, it might be currently that we have this in our ordinance, I'm not sure, but section 15, insurance question. We're requiring $3 million for insurance for bodily injury and then motor vehicle liability, workman's comp, and so kind of like who's going to track that? I see that, it's going to actually have to be somebody that's going to have to go through the file and make sure that all those pieces are in there. Does that make sense?
Yeah, this is another requirement that is in most franchise agreements, I think all franchise agreements, so it's not a change from
It's not a
what's
different
current-
thing?
Nope.
Okay. Because this sounds like a lot of tracking.
Well, and it might help if you look at it also this way. By putting this in the code, you are shifting the burden of compliance on the applicant who wants the license.
Right.
And taking the burden off your staff to look at every single franchise individually and hope to heck that, I don't know how to say it, but we only have one code. One code, many franchises. Right now,
Yeah.
we have many, many franchises, and they have these little anomalies that were negotiated years ago that some of the people that were involved aren't here now, and so we have to go back and look at all of them, try to refresh our memories.
Right, but it
And-
sounds like we're going to be adding more with CRW, South Fork, Westlake. I mean, we could be adding more to.
There would be more people, but the burden will be shifted to the applicant to comply with what you decide is going to be in your code.
As long as somebody's there to follow it.
I think
Well, they
what
will have the burden to comply with your code regardless of whether anybody follows up.
Okay,
It shifts the burden from
Yes.
the city to police it to the applicant to comply.
yes.
And all of them, most of these providers have their own individual franchise attorneys and whole negotiation teams, some of whom may have called you from time to time to remind you of all the great community service they've done for the city. So that what I'm getting at is they have a team of attorneys and other people that
Yeah.
are going to study that code,
Okay.
and they're going to have that burden of monitoring it themselves
Okay.
to see that they're in compliance. And I sort of like the idea of not having. It's just like if we took a example for, let's say we took our building code, which is a code that says you must build this way to these standards.
Right.
We inspect it, and then we don't go back there every 6 months to make sure they're still doing it. They get a building permit, an occupancy
Right.
license, and then they have the burden on them to maintain their building in a safe operating condition after that, even if we don't catch them doing something to the
Okay.
contrary.
Okay.
And that's what this does. It shifts the burden to the license holder to comply. And then if we find a report or some anomaly happens and we find out they're not complying, then we have to follow up.
Then we
Yeah.
have to take action. Okay.
If I may. In addition, if you've noticed in our personal services agreements and our public works, all of our contracts,
Right.
that we have a set of standard conditions that are included with every agreement. And there's just standard language that includes the insurance requirements and all numerous things that. This is just the same kind of thing as
Okay.
well.
Okay.
Although David is right that it shifts the burden, onto them. But this is just very standard requirements of
Okay.
any contractor.
It would seem, go ahead, Ben.
My last question is kind of what do you see on the horizon for technology? Like Kathy brought up, the whole phone thing, go to Walmart, get your phone. So is there something out there that maybe is missing that we should be looking at putting in?
Well, I think the huge missing piece is wireless.
Okay.
But again, that's a bigger step to take, and it's what this is really just a shift in what you're currently doing, and
Right.
it gets a few other folks who haven't been subject to the franchise requirement and should have been,
Right.
or haven't been paying and should have been. But it's not a whole shift in your, your fees, where you would, that would be another place you could go, is a fee that charges anyone who provides service in the city, regardless of whether or not they use the right-of-way. So then you're going to get wireless and possibly some other folks. But that's a big step. We're keeping this right-of-way based at this point.
Okay. So would that be something we'd look at like in the future?
There's a lot of speculation that a lot of this stuff is going wireless, and the wires in the ground are going to be meaningless at some point.
Right.
I don't think we're certainly not there now.
no.
But it is something to keep in mind. And I think what you do is you monitor your revenues, your franchise fee revenues, and see what's happening. And if you see them dropping off, it's time to figure out what's going on. Is this all wireless? Are people dropping their landline phones even more and it's all wireless and we need to consider this? Or is it some other new technology that we're not covering? But really that is the wireless right now is the big thing that's out there that
Okay.
we're not making any attempt to
So
go off
has
here.
any of our cities around us, cities, in Oregon, attempted anything, an ordinance or anything?
For wireless?
For wireless?
Yes. In the last 5 years or so, there have been a couple, and I don't know of any that have been successful recently.
Okay.
There are, I think, 3. The last I checked, I may be wrong. There's a few cities that are getting wireless, that have taxed or imposed a
Right.
fee on wireless. But recently, there's several cities that have tried. They were subject to a referral, or in a couple of cases, there was enough of an outcry about it that they backed off. So
Okay.
it's there. You really need to be sure that's what you want to do and be really
Right.
ready to go out and
Right.
campaign for it.
Okay.
If that's where you want to go.
Okay. That's what I
And
want.
we thought that we probably have enough challenges.
I think you do. I agree.
And even with this, if I might, watered-down version, we don't have to worry, I don't think, about the sewer and water pipes becoming wireless.
yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
We have enough challenges implementing this thing. It's going to be a good product when it's done.
Yeah.
But the implementation piece is going to take a lot of work, and we just didn't want to pick fights with people if we could avoid it.
Oh,
and trying to
absolutely. I
implement it.
agree. All right. Thank you.
I would like to come to this wireless piece. We have a lot of wireless devices. We got radio, we've got television. Well, a lot of people are on cable, but other people are using broadcast lines. We're not charging for that. And I think that you're going to have a harder argument saying you're going through the city's air right of way. The air moves around, magnetic things move around, and I don't know how you would charge for that. I mean, you could perhaps have, they used to have them, a license to have a radio and a license to have a TV. Back in history, I guess there were such licenses that were required, and they finally got abandoned because I think too many people got them and they didn't want to pay for them anymore.
Well, yeah.
So I'm not sure that's ever an area you really want to go into because we use walkie-talkies down at the antique fair. We're going to be
Yeah.
charged for using walkie-talkies.
Right,
I mean, there's it is an area that I don't even really want to think of.
Yeah, and that's fine. I think
Yeah.
if I'm a landline phone provider today, my response would be, well, I have to pay a franchise fee for providing phone service, and you've got this whole other group of phone providers, the wireless
Because
folks,
you're using
who
the
don't.
city's
Well,
right-of-way.
Well,
Right.
at this point, the wireless is not completely wireless. It
That-
goes to towers. There
That's
are
right.
wires
and you
involved.
got and that's
so-
covered, sort of. You got
yeah.
this.
So, but anyway, I think that I
Yeah,
see where
we're-
you're going with it. But I think that's the cities that have considered it. That's really what it's been. Is hey, phone service is phone service.
Yeah.
Whether it's wireless or wireline, let's treat them all the same.
Right.
The other thing, some of the questions you were asking there about the things that were in there, it becomes a boilerplate really for what an entity needs to provide, insurance, all these other things, and they can provide them. I mean, I'm doing some seismic stuff in my house, and all of a sudden I see these forms I'm supposed to sign. One of them required by the City of Oregon City. But it's all boilerplate. They know it's there, and so they should be prepared to provide all the
And
documentation for what's ever in there, and that makes it easier because they know exactly what's required.
Right. No. My question was, is it going to be more of a burden on staff to track that everything's in the file?
I think it'll actually be easier because you can do a standard spreadsheet
Yeah.
and just say, here's all the things everyone's supposed to have in their file.
Yeah.
When it comes in, you check the box or you put the date.
Right.
You don't have a franchise by franchise checklist. It's uniform.
Right.
So
Right.
once you get it up and running,
It'll be
it's pretty
easier.
easy.
Yeah. Okay. That was just what my.
And you may
concern
recall
was.
from our retreat that we talked about some of the increased revenues, perhaps funding a position
Yeah.
that would help manage the whole right-of-way ordinance and all the franchises.
Which is what I was wondering about. Yes. Thank you.
It would also seem that you could point out to the providers, as this becomes more universal, this is going to save them money too in negotiations and, just like,
Right.
Yes.
Right.
so, good point.
Mr. Gifford. You're sitting right by Nancy.
Thank you very much, Doug and Commissioners. My name is William Gifford. I live in Oregon City. I know it's not common to have citizen comments during this, but I'm very impressed with the depth of this discussion. It's really, really heartening to see this type of analysis going on, and I really, really appreciate all of this. I did have a couple of questions about this proposed fees for right-of-way ordinance. There's I'm looking in the handout here. I don't know where you find this in your handouts, but it talks about a registration fee, and I'm assuming these are annual fees. Is that correct?
The registration fee is an annual fee. The license is you only pay the license application fee when you apply for a license, which I think in this proposal is every 5 years. And then the right-of-way usage fee is an annual fee. It's actually paid quarterly. But
Okay, I don't know that I noticed that anywhere on here, the fact that it is an annual fee, except for the fact that it mentions that it will increase 3% annually. And I'm wondering if that might be considered to be a minimum of 3% annually, rather than, because it does make a minimum of annual fee of this, a minimum of this, minimum of that, but it doesn't talk about the increases of this 3%. What's that?
Water rates.
I said the same thing about water rates. Okay.
Yeah, good point, Kathy.
And the last comment down there about the attachment fee, the $5,000. I don't know if that was let me use the word scientifically determined or economically, mathematically determined. What's the optimum fee? Because fees, as far as I'm concerned, and I very much appreciate Commissioner Mum's comment about the fact that we don't want to deter businesses, but we do think that fees should pay for, I mean, there should be a quid pro quo. And so I'm wondering, is $5,000 what it costs the city, or is this just, I don't want it to be perceived as a way that we can get more money from a business.
Right.
And then is that $5,000 per attachment, again, an annual fee? And the attachment fee shall also increase 3% annually. And I just wanted some justification as to why there would be that if it's an annual fee. Where did the $5,000 come from? And what makes 3% an optimal figure?
And I'm happy to address that. First of all, the rate sheet that you're looking at is really a draft. As I said, it's not, I didn't put it together in resolution form. I didn't want it to be mistaken as a resolution when we hadn't even discussed what these rates would be. So the final product would be a lot more clear about how these apply. And a lot of the context about whether or not it's annual and stuff is in the ordinance itself. And we would probably put it in the resolution too, so it's clear. But yeah, so I apologize. It's not designed to be the final product. And for the $5,000 attachment fee, that is based off of what other jurisdictions are charging for that kind of a thing. There aren't that many, honestly. I think if you compare that to what it would be for 5% of the gross revenue, which would be tens of thousands of dollars. $5,000 is the idea was, something that is not a huge sum, but represents some payment when everybody else that's benefiting from the right-of-way is paying typically based on the revenue they derive from it. So I think it isn't a scientifically determined cost-based fee, but it is a fee more along the lines of what seems fair if they don't have to pay a percentage of revenue, so that it's not a huge sum that deters people, but it's still something.
Right.
So that's where it came from, and obviously all of this stuff is up for discussion, and it's up for you to decide, and you don't even have to do the attachment fee. Again, it was just a way to reassure wireless folks that there is no effort here to impose a revenue-based, a percent of revenue fee.
Yeah.
And I don't even know if any of these antennas are on poles in the city. It was really just a precaution, so we didn't have wireless folks coming in here saying, "What are you doing? Why are you taxing us?" Because that was not the intention at all. So when we go through the fee resolution, all this stuff will be clarified. And
Nancy,
the 3%,
if I might,
yeah.
the attachment fee, John was just talking to me in one of the breaks here, that a lot of our wireless providers have lease agreements with the city on city property, on water towers and things like that aren't in our right-of-way. They're our property.
Right.
And so they've contracted for the access. And so in that case, there probably wouldn't even be an attachment fee that would apply.
Oh, no, yeah. The existing antennas on public property or private property, the tall ones,
Right.
those are not included because those are not in the right of way. So
But
we're
the-
only talking about
Poles.
yes,
Yeah.
and there'd be small antennas on top of poles potentially. I mean, I think under your current code, telecommunications code, they were probably subject to the franchise requirement. But so, and there may not be any out there. I don't know.
Right.
And just to address the 3%, David, do you want to talk about that? That was, David wanted to make sure there was some sort of clause so that these rates weren't just set and
Singled out.
you
Yeah.
realize that
And we
there's
thought about indexing them to CPI, and in a perfect world, we probably would do that. Knowing administratively what the staff limitations are and how when we try to be perfect, we sometimes create administrative
Yes.
impossibilities for ourselves. I thought it would be more clear to let them know what to budget for and what our fee was going to be. And so the 3% seemed to be pretty consistent with what historically has been the inflation in our region.
Yes.
And that's why we chose that. We didn't want the fee to become outdated. If we had to prove what our right-of-way costs are, chances are we could show, just from health insurance alone, that the cost of managing our right-of-way is accelerated more than 3%.
Yeah.
I assume
I think
we've
it's good.
got the examples of other right-of-way ordinances that have been put forward, and so we have some basis of making fee judgments. In terms of discouraging businesses, most of these businesses, of course, are want to provide services to citizens in our city anyway. So, but I understand what you're saying, and I agree with you. And I want to thank you very much for going through such detail in this particular ordinance.
Well, something I've been experiencing lately.
No kidding. Thank you.
I just want to be thinking what's going to come down the road in 20, 50 years.
And thank you for coming. Appreciate
Thank
your
you, Nancy.
appreciate your
Thank you.
presentation. Okay, now
So is the commission ready for us to proceed to the next steps with this? That's
I am.
generally what we get
Yes.
from our work sessions
Yes, I
based on
am.
the question. Okay.
we're now coming to the topic of great interest. It's the resolutions that are going to set up the basis for us putting forward ballot titles.
Yes.
Now, I'm just a little bit confused. Is this something, a resolution that is going to come to us at the city commission level, I presume, at our next meeting? And we are discussing it here at the study session. So we're not making any decisions. We're looking at it and making sure if the wordsmithing that we were doing and so forth, concerns are met before we come into our commission meeting.
That's correct. This kind of led out of the city commission meeting last Wednesday, where the commission gave direction to separate the two measures and started making the wordsmithing through our way through and thought there might be a better setting to handle it, and that's kind of to get the commission to take a look at it and get comments and suggestions. And I think John has some information. Our public works director. Do I have that title right, or if I?
That's right.
Okay,
Very
good.
good. Yeah. So, thank you, Mayor and Commissioners, for having us back. I want to move through this because most of it you've seen before. Also wanted to acknowledge we've got Leah and Eli and Martin Montalvo, our new operations manager.
you guys.
Back of the Commission chambers. They're tracking this issue quite closely, as you might imagine.
Yes.
So anyway, and Leah's got a lot of time into these presentations as well. So I'll go through this kind of quickly. So our agenda, I did want to go through just some reminders what the water rates would look like if we did allowed the rollback to happen. What would happen if we had no water rate rollback with a 3% cap? What would happen with a no water rate rollback with a 6% cap? And then because it continues to come up, I just kind of wanted to talk about the no water rate rollback with 3% cap and some kind of a general obligation bond. So that's kind of been suggested. Why don't we just front end all this work that we have to do and get it done, and what that would look like. And we've shared that with you in the past. So all of those slides are old slides. I'm just trying to keep that fresh.
Yeah.
We want to go through the charter amendments alternatives that we talked about last week, and then since Valentine's Day is coming on the 14th, we wanted to bring you something special, so we're going to bring you a little extra morsel there for you to chew on.
Oh, we love it. She's a rusty pipe.
I don't think we didn't bring rusty pipes today. did we? No rusty pipes. And then we want, obviously, some discussion, because, and I understood you asked us to bring this to this meeting, at our last meeting. So
Yeah.
that's another reason why we're here.
I thought it was just you enjoyed our company.
That too. So this is what happens if we have a rate rollback. And remember that if we're not successful in May, and we're to go on to a November and continue, that the rate rollback is scheduled to occur in October 15th, 2014, and then be effective on November 1st. We've done some calculations as to what that would cost, and it assumes a 3% rate increase. So it assumes a rollback. It assumes that we could calculate what the rate increases would be at 3% for every year. And so this applies to our 2011 rates. This is the same slide, again, that we've shown you before. So the gross difference is almost $1.4 million. It's a 27% rate decrease. So the difference is a decrease of $1,372,773 is how it's calculated. So
Is this on our website?
I believe many of these presentations are on our website. I think the meeting connections are. I'd have to. Leah, do you recall which ones are and which ones aren't?
This would be, just so you guys know, I think this would be an important one to have on the website, because it does show that percentage, that 27% number.
Okay.
Or
Yeah.
a flyer, literature.
Yeah, something.
I think the last time I looked at it, it was mostly these meetings, public meetings that were posted.
Right.
But not all. I mean, we've been given lots of presentations,
A lot,
and
yeah.
so not all of those are on there. But we can add this slide.
But
and
definitely,
feature
I think
slide.
this is an important
Okay.
one.
Again, if the rollback were to occur, this was a slide that we've shared before. This is basically shows us about 5 years projected forward where that what that rate would do to us. So the bottom layer is the darkest green color is our purchases from South Fork Water. There is some there is a rate of inflation included in that, and actually for all of these. The lighter green is the O&M. If you remember, that debt service will be paid off at the end of this year or sometime. No, that's not right. At the end of, I want to say 2014-15, in that time frame. And then everything else is what we consider capital. And later in the slide presentation that we showed you, we also break out our operations center. It's not shown in this one, but it's included in the dark blue. And then the red line represents the revenue line, which includes that 27% decrease. So I think this one's important because we've split these two measures out, and we're talking about, at least that's what we talked about last week, we're splitting those two out. So I've heard strong support for the rollback. Not so sure where we're at, but this would keep us basically where we are today,
Right.
moving forward. And so, again, a lot of capital that's not wouldn't be covered under this scenario. So, be successful in that we pass the rollback. Wouldn't be so successful in that we would not really be able to pay for a capital program.
John, you've said rollback a couple of times. We're actually trying to
Not.
Not use that.
pass the elimination of the rollback.
Yes.
Not pass
We
the
want to
elimination.
eliminate it.
We'll eliminate
No
the
rollback.
Yes.
No rollback. So, sorry.
That's okay.
And using it so long, though,
I-
that term
It's
kind of
true.
like driven in here.
I use blue heron all the time.
And we know what you're talking about.
Okay, so this shows an acute.
I call it the planning department still, too. Go ahead.
That's all right. We'll go with it.
Okay, so cumulative unfunded capital, if the rollback occurs, and it ends up in a estimated 20-year deferment capital of liability of $52.9 million. So, big number. Again, if the city's successful and there's no rollback, goes to 6% scenario. This showed us out to year 2023, where we actually kind of catch up to some degree. And Mayor Neely, if you remember, you said, I'd like to see that over a longer period of time. So that's this picture. So we're showing that 6%, and at some point in time, we feel that should be able to decrease. And I see the zero there. I always kind of wonder about that number, but I'm not sure about how that would work. But in general, that's a long-term time to project water rates
I
and their
understand.
effects. But it does show it was a slide that was helpful to kind of get our hands around that 6% number. And then this is the cumulative unfunded capital liability under the same scenario. So at some point in time, we pretty far out there, but in theory we get to no deferred capital liability. Okay. And this is what the rates look like under that 6% scenario. We're showing 3% the first year because we'd still be under our current rate structure, and then we'd add to our rate increases annually at 6% over the next several years. And so you see the dollar amount at the bottom line. Really, I think what we've been saying is somewhere between $2 and $3 for the average household. And this is based on a single-family residential home, 8 cubic feet per 100 cubic feet per month of water usage and a 1-inch water meter. Those numbers will vary based on those kind of factors and usage and things, but that's what we've been talking about. So this is one that I wanted to share because we kind of hear this scenario from I think community members who have got a lot of interest in this topic as well. So what would happen if we put all that capital up front and took out a loan, built it over a shorter period of time, somewhere between 5 to 10 years? What would those rates look like? So we ran that scenario before. Again, we're showing $35.5 million is what we would borrow at 3% over 20 years, which would be, good rates. I'm a little worried about how to do $35.5 million even in a 5 to 10 year period. It seems crunched. 5 years definitely, and I think based on the number of miles of pipe that we're talking about, it would be a challenge for the community to accept as well.
Can't you just snap your fingers and make it be done?
That'd be nice.
Make it so.
So I think we've gone through this discussion. The other piece that this shows is it shows the percentages aren't showing up on here, but my recollection is it was an 18% increase that first year. So in order to pay for that kind of capital lending, we'd have to step up right off the bat with an 18% and then level that off to 3% to be able to pay for that. We showed you one other scenario that was a little more soft, but it was still big numbers. It was like 8% over the first 5 years and then flattened out.
So is this what West Lynn is doing?
Well, I'm not sure if West Lynn is trying to actually match its backlog of capital needs, but they are taking they're proposing an 18% increase. Where that gets them in relationship to what their needs are, I don't know. I think that rate was more established based on what they thought their community might accept as opposed to what their needs are. But
I presume then it levels back to their current 5%. I mean, they were in a little bit worse problem because they had a smaller base than we did. Even though they were increasing at 5%, we had a higher base rate. So
Right.
they were in trouble.
Well, West Lynn didn't have they didn't take the loans out in 1994 that. So they kept their rates as we left ours the full amount back in that time frame. Okay, so I'm going to show you 3 measures and an ordinance here. This measure is the rollback piece. It's what we talked about on Wednesday, our last commission meeting. We've made a lot of changes. Bill, I don't know if you want to talk through this. It's basically, maybe you need to read it and let me know if this is what you remember. We kind of changed there was some concern about the word rollback. We changed that to setback. So anyway, I'm going to let you read that.
And that's what you gave us tonight, too?
We got this.
Yes.
Sure.
Correct?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And you
I
have
just
the
cut and
year in
pasted
there,
that.
So that's good.
Yes, got the year in there.
94.
And certain additional increases, I think, was what you came up with. And
Yeah, and I'm trying to remember what the word count was. I want to say there's a maximum of 175 words, and I think we're up at 160 more or less. So there is some room to fiddle a bit.
Well, just to add some more in there.
No.
Shall, may.
The longer it is to read, I think the more fit up.
Yes, I agree.
You know, there's that
I agree.
accuracy and conciseness tend to not coincide as much as you might like.
So we're ready for a discussion of the measures, is that right?
well, I thought we'll read this one. We'll read the next one.
Yeah, we got them in front of us.
I'd like to go through
Go
them
ahead.
all, and then
Okay.
the last slide, and then open that back
So
up.
we'll take care of measure.
So this is kind of the second measure, if you will. The measure numbers, disregard the measure numbers. I was just trying to put them in some kind of order. They would obviously change.
Right.
So this would this is the piece. Yeah, this is the 3 to 6% piece.
This is not the wording we had before us as the question.
No, it is not the wording you saw on Wednesday. There was an attempt to take what you did on Wednesday and put that in there, and there might be a few other.
I think people are going to look at that and they don't even know what we're talking about. Shall Section 3058 of the Charter be eliminated? Yes, it explains it later, but I think it should be specific into what's intended. And I think these things that we have before us here is more clear as to what's intended.
I thought this was the same.
Well,
Shall the Oregon City Charter be amended to eliminate provision requiring the setback of water rates to 1994 levels?
The measure one was the piece that dealt with the rollback. This measure addresses the change in rates from 3 to 6%.
And what we have here is shall the limitation of
Yeah,
water
it's
rate
different.
increases in the Oregon City Charter be amended from 3% to, I would have a suggested change here.
Somehow something happened because
Yeah.
that's 50.
That's what they're proposing.
The elimination. Yeah.
so the papers that we have are not correct.
No.
Papers you have are correct. I'm
Wait,
thinking
go
maybe.
back to Measure 2 again. Because Measure 2 is just eliminating the water rate limitation. The question doesn't capture that because the question says the entirety of 58 eliminated, and that's not what this proposes to do. So
Right.
the one at the table, the
Is
paper
it-
ones,
that's what we're
are the ones
discussing.
that talks about keeping the limitation but going from 3% to
Right.
6%.
Yeah. So, I mean, the wording at our table, as I thought would prefer for if that's all right with the commission, is the ones that we're talking about. I think.
And
shall-
not the ones on the screen.
Well, shall Section 58 of the Charter be eliminated? I mean, it doesn't tell anybody in the
No,
question what we're
no.
even talking about.
No.
And
I'm not quite sure what I did then.
that's okay.
I
We
think
got
I
a
made
sheets of paper here.
mistake there.
In the wording here on what I'll call,
I guess which resolution number?
Which
I'm
measure?
talking about, well, I'll take them in the order they're written, the 1303 and 1302. I can talk
Okay.
about 1302 first then.
1302 first?
Let's talk about 1302 first. I would suggest a slight addition is to no more than 6%. And maybe we won't have to change the charter ever again, and if we hit the point where we meet our deferred capital needs and in fact can decrease it, we'd be able to decrease it.
See, this says no more than 6%.
Yeah, no, okay. And I'm just looking at this where that got
Yeah.
cut out of there.
So let me make sure I understand what you're suggesting. That you're suggesting no more than 6% in the question?
Yes.
Okay, as opposed to the summary. And this is one where we're struggling with word limits because that question has to be 20 words.
Yes.
1,
So-
2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, 20.
It does have the added
Okay.
benefit. It has
Well,
the
we
added-
can't do that.
It has the added benefit, too, of reminding folks what the current limitation is
Right.
in the first sentence. And
Yeah.
so it helps them understand 6 when they know 3 is already in existence, I
Okay.
think. Yeah.
All right.
Yes.
All righty.
So I'm not sure what happened with the slide with measure 2. Where did we land with the actual text for the rate change? Are we okay with that? I kind of missed
I
that.
think,
See the action.
So on this one here, the one that starts out, right, if you're looking at page 3 of 4, the caption amends Oregon City Charter water rate limitation.
so is that resolution 13-02?
It's 1302, yes, the
Okay.
water rate limitation.
That's the one we're talking about.
And that's measure 2 of the question got
Yeah, I
cut
won't-
somehow.
I'm afraid that the question, the way it's worded, is it's not going to succeed. I don't know how to make it be any better, but
I think we got to tell them what it is and where it's going.
Don't we have the summary to do that?
And the some, and there, surprisingly enough, there is a huge body of case law dealing more with state measures that talks about what the purposes of the various pieces are.
Okay.
And I'll kind of run through that, and it tells you what the various pieces of the ballot measure are entitled. The caption is intended to reasonably identify the subject matter of the measure. So, you don't get into details, but what are we talking about here? And
Right.
here it's, a water rate limitation. And the question is intended to, I meant to highlight this and never got to it. And I'm not finding the question. And the summary is intended to contain a concise and impartial statement summarizing the state measure and its major effects. Let me get that question piece. A better place to find it might be. Sorry, apologize for this. The question is intended to. Question not more than 20 words. It plainly phrases the chief purpose of the measure, so an affirmative response to the question corresponds to an affirmative vote. So if you want something to happen, that's, the question is yes, then you should vote yes.
okay. So and I don't know if we can do this, and it might be crazy, okay? And you can tell me if I'm crazy, it's okay. But can't we just take the 3% out and say, shall the limitation of the water rate increase in Oregon City Charter be amended to 6% without a vote of the people? Or does it have to say 3 to 6? I want to be as successful with this as possible. So the intent is we want it to go to 6%. And then anything after 6%, it's a vote of the people. So I don't know.
Well, if we do that, you can put the no more than in there, but
I don't know if we can do that. I don't know if that makes any sense.
I like it.
I'm just afraid that people are going to go, it's
Yeah,
already at
because it's
3%.
raising,
I'm
right.
not going to
Right.
raise it anymore.
Right, that's what I-
3%'s enough.
But if you say no more than 6%, it shows it's a limit.
well, then the summary
I
will
don't
make the summary will make
I
that
see what
clear.
you're
Then
saying.
Yeah, the summary makes it clear. And I don't know if we can do it or not.
If we can say within, I think so. It's the chief purpose is to set the limitation at 6%.
Right. That's
Limitation one
the
rate increases in Oregon City Charter
No more than.
be no more than
6%.
Without a vote of the people. That's the important piece, too. People like to vote.
Well, can't we get rid of all this stuff that says the increases in Oregon City Charter shall be set at no more than 6% without a vote of the people? We could get rid of all those other words.
I don't know.
Does the count work?
I don't want to wordsmith, and I'm sorry, I'm
Well,
micromanaging, but I'm kind of concerned.
We need to get something that, because this is going to go as an emergency. Well, is this a resolution?
This is.
Oh, this is a resolution.
Mm-hmm.
And in any case, it doesn't have to have a second reading, but we want to make sure that it's something that unanimously passes out of this commission.
Yes.
Yeah, exactly.
So,
So, I don't know, I just want to throw it out for you guys to
I like it.
think about.
What I'm hearing is, shall the limitation on water rate increases in Oregon City, in the Oregon City Charter be amended to no more than 6%?
okay.
Without a vote of the people.
If we're going to do that, at some other point, be it in the summary or elsewhere, that we should make reference to the 3%.
Well, it says that
It's
in the summary.
Okay.
The last
Do we have
Yes, there
in
it
the
is. Okay,
first-
right.
Do we have to say Oregon City Charter, or can we just say the charter? Because if
You know,
you're
it
at
is
22
in the
words,
city, and we've
and
got
if you
the
take out
caption.
Oregon City, you're at
Yeah.
20.
We could
We
say
could probably
city
drop-
charter.
Yeah.
Say the word on Oregon. I think, Mayor, the explanatory statement is a
Yes.
really good place.
Yeah,
to
that's
put
fine.
That 3, 6, the whole.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
okay, I'm
So-
fine.
And again, I hate
I mean, I'm
to
fine with it, I didn't mean I was fine.
micromanage.
All right, so basically, we need to do the word count and make sure it works, but, essentially, this shall the limitation on water rate increases in the city charter be no more than 6% without a vote of the people,
Yes.
essentially. And we got to do the word count, make
Yes.
sure that
Yes.
works and see what kind of.
Yeah, you'll have to like wordsmith it.
Without voters' approval, you get rid of it.
Yeah,
Yeah,
True.
you just get rid of a preposition or two.
You're okay with the caption and the summary?
Yes,
Yes.
I am.
So we, before I show you the next slide, I'm going to, we struggled a little bit with the language as well, always have. I struggle a little bit with the idea of splitting, but I think that there's some good reasons for doing it and others not. Looked at this from a little higher level again, because we've looked at it this way in the past, and this idea isn't necessarily new, it's just bringing it back to you, and I recognize the direction that we've already gotten, so don't beat me up too much for this. But when we were talking about it, it was like, well, if you look back at the history and why the public kind of voted the way they did, they were upset about a rate increase and maybe the way that information was conveyed to the public in terms of public information. I've heard some concern about, was the water intake structure, was it too big, and to me it's kind of like, well, looking in hindsight, probably built the right project based on your water rates, that's probably the right thing to do.
Absolutely. You got to think about the future. We're going
That's
to be
right.
here for 50 years,
And then from that point forward,
Maybe.
I haven't heard anything that said that there was a misuse of those dollars or that those dollars were spent inappropriately. But yet the trust issue seems to be driven more by the way that came about, right?
Mm-hmm.
How water rates came up and whether there was good community discussion about that. So, because of that mistake, I would say, that was made by those commissioners at that time, or the city at that time, we ended up with Section 58.
Right.
And it's continued continues to be a problem, at least, now that we're getting close to the rollback period. But it was definitely a big deal back then. So, David and I have been brainstorming a little bit about how to make this simpler. I mean, it does feel a little bit challenging
Yeah,
to get
it
over.
does.
Again, we think that elimination of that Section 58 is a clean way to go. Recognize that's not the direction the Commission's given us, but we put and William's got his head down because he didn't draft this one, and this is part of the, this is part of the reason why I think the last slide. He's just going, oh my God.
John, before you go to the next slide and get beat up, let me fall
Okay,
on my
jump in
sword
there.
a little bit too. You probably recall, I'm sure that Commissioner Roth will recall, when we first talked about this several weeks ago, Commissioner Roth said, I'm uncomfortable with having these numbers, numerical limitations in the charter, just from a governance perspective. And the example I used with John today, as I said, we have a federal highway system, an interstate highway system in the country, but we don't put our speed limit in our Constitution. We put it in a piece of legislation. We passed a law of the land. The speed limit's 55, or if you're in Montana, 155, and that's where we put it because that's where it belongs. In your city charter, for example, you don't put the speed limit in your city park shall be no more than 15 miles per hour. You pass ordinances to do that. So we were looking at this from a best practices standpoint. Now, before we go to the next slide, I like the changes that you have just made in this two-part proposal for having separate measures. I think if you're going to go that route, the things you've just done tonight are pretty good. And I think they will help you explain it, help simplify it, help get it adopted. But as a technician looking at best practices, there's a reason that 99% of Oregon cities in the state have the responsibility and the authority, and your original charter had the authority for you to have the ability to regulate water rates. And you might recall an email that I sent you, I think it was the next day after Commissioner Roth mentioned she was uncomfortable with those numbers in the charter. And I think actually that was something I thought I saw a consensus on that. So the next day I had this aha moment, and I sent you all an email and said if anybody has any questions, get back to me. And no one got back to me. So I thought, well, it must have been perfectly clear, or nobody likes the idea. So just to make sure that I've done my job to give you advice, I think that your limitations and your caps and your numerical limitations should, under best practices, should normally be in your municipal code by ordinance. And that your other guidelines, your bigger, larger scale guidelines, should be in your charter. So I just want to make sure that I've checked the box and we've done our job to bring that forward as a way for the council to discipline itself and say we are going to impose on ourselves limitations even if the voters do not.
I understand what you're saying. I totally disagree with it at this point in the day.
Okay.
I think you could totally check it off because if we even tried that with the climate of our county of our citizens right now, it would flop.
Okay.
You're
I
gonna have
want
people
this.
saying, "Oh, you're just taking back what we took back."
Well,
from
Yes.
can we then, just for academic
I just
purposes, can we
don't
show you
even
the
wanna go
homework
down
and
that
then
road.
go to the next last slide? Because we know this isn't going to get any traction.
No.
I just want to show you what we wrote.
Well, this isn't it?
That's
No. Is that what we wrote? I don't recognize that.
I understand what you're saying.
Each person can fill in their ballot with a little blank there.
I understand what you're saying. I understand that the
not
commission
what we-
used to be able to do that. I understand that. But in this climate that we have,
Okay.
I think it's going to flop.
I don't hear anybody
Put it out
disagreeing with that. So, John, I think we can just wrap it
Listen,
up.
let me
Yes.
come to the other point here on this too. When I first heard the committee of two suggesting that we do it this way, I had a little angst, and then it occurred to me, listen, we get, let's say we get one of these to go. We've got November to
Yes.
tell our message better if we didn't do it the first time
That's
around
right.
on the other one.
Yes.
And I think having both pieces in a single one probably will have a greater chance of failure than having two pieces separate, in which I believe the setback one would probably pass. And if it turns out the one that actually deals with the percentage increase doesn't pass, we got another go at it in November.
Yes. That's exactly correct.
So I like what we've done here, and so it looks like you're not going to persuade us.
Happy Valentine's Day.
Thank you, John.
But
I did-
sometimes our job is to just tell you what we think.
No, that's fine.
No, that's
And then we
perfect.
also recognize, just so you know, we recognize that the commission reflects the values of the community. And
Absolutely.
the staff's job is to make these recommendations, and when they go through the values filter,
Yes.
There's what you might do if you're playing the Sim City game, and then there's what you can do in the political world in which we live. And we
Right.
rely on our commissioners to reflect that back to us. So we're not, I'm not chagrined by this at all. I'm glad that we've had the discussion.
Well, it's good to have all the options laid
Yeah.
out, and thank you
Yeah.
for all this.
Yes.
So,
Yeah.
it's good to think about everything.
Yeah, just don't do it again.
Yeah.
Tell you only what you want to hear.
really think that?
Tell you only what you want to hear, really?
Are you ready for more questions on this subject? Okay. So a couple of technical questions. Commissioner Roth and I met. We're heading up we're going to pass this water rate situation.
You mean 22 people are going to vote on it?
Yes. Kathy and I are voting, and it's a done deal.
Yeah.
But if with this committee that we have, we're still formulating things. Now, once we, as a commission, we've made this decision at our next meeting, does that mean everything on the city website that's currently there about this is like removed, or can we put a link to the city webpage?
Facts can stay on
And-
there, but
Yeah,
that's that.
and Commissioner Smith was just talking, the facts can remain there. And there's actually a pretty good guidance document from the Secretary of State's office about these things. The basic idea is that, the people don't want public dollars to go towards advocating towards
Right.
one side or the other. However, if there's documents that have been created prior to it being available, those documents are freely available. The city can keep whatever it wants up on its website, and certainly you and whoever else might be pushing the measure, or even someone who might be opposed, can get copies of all those documents and to make their cases.
So like if we have like a website or a Facebook page or something, we can go click here and it'll lead you to the Oregon City website page and the presentation will be there.
Yeah.
And
This
that
was a
kind of thing.
presentation the City Commission saw in June of 2012.
Okay, and we can
Here's-
legally do that, correct?
Yes.
Okay.
We, just to clarify, I mean, there's several products that have been created
Right.
in this process, and, well, because we thought we were going to have this decision on February 6th, Alita was scrambling to get confirmation from the Secretary of State, and she sent, I don't know, there's probably 5 or 6 different emails of 5 or 6 different work products that they've given us this, I think they call it Safe Harbor, and they actually give us a registration number that says we reviewed this and it's consistent with.
Basically, we don't think it's advocacy, so these are
It's like a
documents. So we
release.
wanted to make sure,
Right.
Commissioner Mum, I need to also suggest to you that, and maybe this is where John's going, but there have been so many, we all know, we've lived through so many iterations of what we might do, could do, should do,
Right.
want to do. I think it will be important for us to make sure that our website reflects what's actually on the menu
The current.
and the relevant documents that are going to, now we'll keep all the other stuff, they're public records, but we don't want you to have a link on something that is confusing to people and
That's the
reflects
other piece I was
it reflects some other proposal that you were talking about 6 months ago rather than the current one. So I think we're going to have to be kind of careful and make sure that our website contains only the current relevant information that's up to
Okay.
date.
What I'd like to suggest is that this very last presentation be the one that we link to, because it's very clear and it's short.
So I wanted to make sure.
Well,
that-
I would say with the addition of the changes you've made.
Yes.
Well, right. No, but
Probably
I
want
mean,
us to
the
update.
graphs is what,
Yeah.
are what I'm talking about
Very good.
primarily.
So clean this up, make sure it's posted. I'm not sure about the meetings and whether we still leave the meetings up because they've got a variety of things behind them. But
Okay.
we'll look at that and
Okay.
talk to Nancy.
I just wanted to make sure we could link, okay, legally.
Yes.
The other thing is, we're planning a stakeholders group meeting. Now, because we're both commissioners, can we have another commissioner and mayor at the meeting while we're discussing the planning? Or is that something we have to, not do?
We want to be careful with it. And the
Yes.
concern is that if you have a quorum of the City Commission meeting to discuss city business,
Right.
you've got a public meeting that has to be noticed in minutes and all the rest. And we've talked about similar situations in the past where, for example, 3 commissioners show up at a community meeting that impacts. And generally, we think the answer is you can do that. if the mayor is there, two other city commissioners, and one of the commissioners isn't back and doesn't say anything, does that constitute discussion? I think we've got to look at the individual situation and make sure we understand what's occurring.
Because this is a stakeholders meeting where we're going to be drawing out kind of a plan. Okay, so that I just want to be sure that we're safe. We should
Right.
only have two, probably, at a stakeholders
I know that
meeting.
the mayor has some things.
Then my other question is, when we do the plan where everybody walks the neighborhoods, now that is when everybody can be there and participate, correct?
Well, sure. If
Okay.
the three, if all five of the commissioners are there knocking on doors, talking to people,
Okay.
you're not meeting with each other.
Right.
And we're not all going to the same door together.
Yeah,
I just want to be clear. I don't want to get in trouble.
you're in charge. You don't get to raise. You don't have to raise your hand.
And if I could add to that, if you're going to introduce the mayor, for example, and there are two of you there, and the mayor's going to arrive and say a few things, and then, you can always introduce the mayor. This is Mayor Neely, and I'm leaving now. I'll be back when he's done. And you can actually walk out. And he
okay.
can.
Okay.
The other thing I want to mention is that staff, on their own time, when they're not, you can't show up in your police uniform even on your own time. You can't bring the trappings of government with you. I could probably wear my blue blazer, but you can show up. You can show up on your own time as a city employee, on your own time. You can go on weekends. You can go door to door with one of these stakeholder groups on
Okay.
your own time.
Okay.
You can't use city time or city resources
That's what I wanna make
as an
sure.
employee after it goes to the referred
Okay.
date,
That's
which
what
will be
I
on
want
the
to make
20th.
sure of.
I wanted to just make a point. We're not, if three or four of us are at this meeting, we're not going to be discussing anything the city's going to do.
No.
That's already been done.
Oh, yeah, that's true.
That's already been done.
I
And
understand.
as long as we don't talk about, well, what if it fails, what shall we do next? We're just talking about these particular issues where
how to
the
pass them.
decision's already been made by the city commission, I presume. And so at that point, we're not really talking about anything that's going to be coming before the commission, as long as we don't talk about possibly coming back in the November ballot.
Oh, good point.
I don't think the Oregon Public Meetings Law is limited in that way. There's what the Oregon.
But if you're going to tell me don't do that anyway, then tell me to do it.
I-
Don't do it that way.
It's not worth the risk.
Yeah, I think there's some significant concerns.
You don't
there,
have to
and-
look up. You
Okay.
just shake your finger at me. I'll be.
Yeah. No.
So when they introduce the mayor, we leave. That's right? Okay, good.
Yeah.
I'll remember that.
Not in here.
You want to do that anyway.
2 by 2, just like the Ark. 2 by 2.
And then I have a request from staff. Before we make this decision, can you send me pictures of the pipes that are currently all clogged up so we can put those on a website or, those ugly.
I think those are in what Alita sent us, aren't they?
Well,
don't
Alita, I
recall,
wasn't
but
on that email, so if you could just
We'll
send
make
me.
sure you get those.
Okay.
I think we would like you to have physical specimens
Well, absolutely.
to
Yeah.
show folks that are interested.
But we also need pictures. So,
Yeah.
okay, I think
Working
that's.
on earrings, right, Kathy? You want to?
I want some earrings. That's right.
We do
Wow,
need
that's gonna be
to make sure that the materials that we provide to proponents of the measure are also available to opponents if they want them. So
Oh, okay.
on the same terms. So we want to make sure that city resources aren't going towards the campaign.
Okay. All right. Those are good answers. Thank you. That's all I have.
Okay, yeah, you better get on there. And Kathy, go ahead.
I have a question that's been posed to me, and I sent this around last week by a note, but it's regarding the money that we've been putting into the future building fund. If that money is coming out of our water rates, our bills, the bills that we're paying, why hasn't that been used on maintenance?
Well, I think we're just considering that a good practice to set aside and save part of that money it's really for water use anyway, right? We need to house our water crew, we need to house our water trucks. So it's essentially an essential facility for the water department, sewer department, so each of the funds are setting aside some money for that. So
What I
it's
need
no
is
different than why do we set aside for a piece of fleet, to
Yeah.
me. We have to do that because it's part of the cost of doing business. And we think the same is true for the building, whether it be a new building or a remodel of the existing building. We feel like it's responsible to set that money aside. Obviously, any capital projects that come along with that will come before this body for approval.
Well, what I need is a convincing argument, because somebody's going to say, it's really
Yeah,
important you've got a
that's
new building
great.
over here, and somebody's going to say, why aren't we using that money to fix my pipes?
Have we used that money to fix pipes, the rate money?
Yes? Yes.
So, actually, you have been fixing pipes with the rates.
Oh, definitely.
But we've also
got a
been
pipe-
saving.
We've been saving,
We've also
right.
been putting money in a
Right.
building fund, and I want to try to help Commissioner Roth with one
Yeah.
of the points that I think I raised when I believe Urban Renewal Commissioner Paul Edgar brought this up because there's this idea, and I had a little debate with Mr. Holliday this weekend about general obligation bonds versus revenue bonds. Now, your GO bonds. Well, let me rephrase this. If we were to look at this and say that we're not going to use any money from the rates to build that building, the only other way that you would build that building is with general fund property tax dollars, which means that none of the tax-exempt institutions or entities in the city, and in our city, that's a large contingent of users of that system who benefit that would not be paying. And that means that that burden of building that building, the water portion only, is not borne, as it should be, by the users of the water utility, but instead by a much smaller group of taxpayers, property taxpayers.
Could you write that synopsis down for me so I can get it in my brain?
Yes.
Thank you.
I can't guarantee that second half,
It's on
but
tape.
I don't think she heard that.
I'd like to make another point too, that you go out for a GO bond. What is the most economically sound way of going and buying a new car? Saving for it and paying for it, or taking out a loan and paying for it, and all the interest, accumulated interest.
Right.
The best way to do it is to save. I mean, the reason this nation and a lot of our people are in so much trouble is.
How many of you watch Dave
put things
Ramsey?
on the credit card.
Any of you know Dave Ramsey, that credit guy? I was watching him one day on a cable channel, that cable channel that pays his franchise, and he said, "I don't borrow." Somebody asked him, "What's your best advice you give young couples or people that are about to have children, things like that?" And he said, "I don't borrow money." He said, "I haven't borrowed money in 20 years. I do borrow money from the bank of Dave Ramsey," which means that every time I buy something, I save and I save and I save until I get. Well, Oregon City, because of various limitations on your ability to finance things or activism or other, just kind of a local culture here, we're sort of a pay-as-you-go city. We've demonstrated that. That's why we're the one city in Oregon I know of that has a reverse debt load, more equity than we have debt.
Right.
Because we deferred maintenance on our pipes for 100 years. that probably helped. But what I'm saying is we have a history of paying as we go, and not.
Let me
Budgeting.
tell you a little. I've taught Dave Ramsey for many years. Not that I follow it, but I teach it. He does make sure that you pay your necessities first.
Yeah, that's right.
So
This is one of those.
this is one of those.
I'll try to get you some language, a paragraph or something about the difference between using the rates to pay for things like a building
Okay.
versus using general fund tax dollars.
Thanks.
Yeah.
Mr. Gifford. I mean, if you're going to do this all the time, why don't you just run for commissioner?
Yes.
Keeps on giving.
William Gifford, live in Oregon City. The caption on these, Mr. Kobayasman, you're talking about the fact that it has to refer as clearly as possible in as few words as possible.
That one's wrong.
This one's wrong. What about that one? I'm looking at the caption and thinking it could easily say amends Oregon City Charter regarding water rates.
And I think to a certain extent that was the original one when they were both combined.
Yeah.
When they're pulled apart, if we use that that terminology, you'd have the same caption for both measures.
Is that a no-no?
I think
Yes.
it would lead to confusion.
Yeah.
I think that would be.
I'm just thinking amends Oregon City Charter, not to disclose too much of my voting history, but usually when I see something that says changes the Constitution of the United States, I don't even read the rest of it. No.
Sure.
good.
But you don't get to vote on that, William.
No, I don't get to vote on
Very
that.
often.
But I'm just suggesting if we could just put a hint of which part of the city charter we're talking about, because this seems to imply, very broad brush.
And this is the one that
Yeah, this is the
somehow
wrong
got
one.
screwy because that's not the right one. The two captions that the commission has in front of them. The first one says amends Oregon City Charter water rate limitation, and that's one that goes from 3% to 6%. And the other one goes amends Oregon City Charter to eliminate setback of water rates.
Right.
So it does. They do say that.
Okay, that's fine. The only second.
You don't have those.
No, I didn't have access to those. I'm going to get some blowback on this, I'm sure, but I have to say it.
That's the wrong one, William.
Give me one that's close to right.
There, that's exactly right. That one right there. But
Somewhere in one of these, there is a phrase that says, oh, thank you very much, Nancy. It says the phrase, without a vote of the people.
Yes, and that is on the water rate limitation
Yeah.
one.
Yeah.
Okay? Exhibit A is ballot
On
title.
the end of the summary.
And it's mentioned, that phrase is in there a couple of times, without a vote of the people.
Yeah, I think it's in there
And
twice.
my gut feeling on this is that's a redundant clause. That by saying that we're going to increase it to no more than 3%, period, says the exact same thing without what I consider is somewhat inflammatory to say without a vote of the people, which throws the whole thing into, this is not about water rates. This is about the right to vote, which
Well,
I think is a red herring. This is about creating a sufficient funding mechanism to supply our water system.
I understand that, but we also have to give them the confidence that they're going to have the right to vote if we go to 7%.
And we have to look at the climate we're working in.
Yeah.
You thought you were going to get blowback. You did.
Oh, yeah. but I had to say it.
Yes.
And
No, I get
I
what
still
you're
think it's
saying.
redundant, and
Yeah.
I still think it's inflammatory, and I think it's diversionary. But on the other hand, if that's what it takes to sell this,
Yeah.
Let me-
Let me say, but it's a fact.
of course. But it
So-
would be a fact with or without that phrase in
That,
there.
that's true, but I don't think it hurts to emphasize that it can't be changed without a vote of the people. And I don't think it hurts. Not everybody knows that the charter requires a vote of the people.
That's true. Okay, those are my questions. Thank you.
While we're on that topic, did some more wordsmithing on the question for the one that we were discussing, the water rate limitation. And here's one, want to run by you to get your thoughts. Shall the city charter limit water rate increases to no more than 6% without a vote of the people? And then the summary would call out the 3%.
Yes.
and-
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
That's
Yes.
great. Thank you.
No, that has to be in.
Yeah. All right.
Thank you. Thanks, William.
Thank you.
3 minutes are up.
I'm very sorry, but this is totally off subject. But I have to squeeze this in the fact that we have two members of the public that have come just for this last item on the agenda, and I think that it's cruel and inhumane to make them sit
Through all of this. I'm sorry, Larry. Yes.
I don't know if that's possible to.
you weren't here for the water rates?
Is it okay with everybody that we go to 3A? 3E?
Yes. That's
Is that
fine.
it? No. Yes, 3E.
3E.
Yeah. Let's go ahead and do 3E.
I'll be right with you.
Okay.
I thought I had a few more minutes to get my materials out, but
Surprise.
that's okay. This should be a relatively quick conversation, hopefully. Commissioners, what you have before you is just for consideration and discussion, and what I'm looking for is some feedback and direction as to whether you'd like me to bring this back to you at a formal meeting for further action. Last year, the Oregon City Citizens Involvement Council, excuse me, I don't want to get that word wrong. The CIC brought forward to the Parks and Rec Committee, PRAC, a proposal that the city should consider adopting a policy which would permit disabled U.S. military veterans the opportunity to use the Clackamat RV Park for up to 5 days within a 30-day period at no charge. And the suggestion came as a result of, I think, some discussion with some veterans groups, and also it basically is modeled after the same policy that State Parks has. It's not exactly the same in terms of State Parks has 26 different places that you can camp, and there are some restrictions about you can only do it so many days at this one, and then you can't go to another one, and all that kind of stuff. But basically, to kind of whittle down, the proposal is it would be for a 5-day duration within a 30-day period. The Parks and Rec Advisory Committee considered this proposal over the course of 2 or 3 meetings in the last year. And then finally, in October, PRAC determined that they were supportive of the proposed policy, and they asked that it be forwarded to the Commission. It's taken a little bit of time to get here just because of some other priorities and things as they've stacked up. Let's see. Yeah, I've attached to your report the Parks and Rec Department, the Oregon State Parks and Rec Department policy. It's pretty extensive, and it's a lot more detailed than we would need to get into. I have not yet written a policy for you to consider specifically, because first I wanted to bring it to you at a work session before I spent the time and before we spent attorney time working on such a thing. But we would, again, if it's something you're supportive of doing, which PRAC is and staff is recommending this, that we would model it after the state parks policy, but we would basically tailor it to our local needs, our local issues. We have a little bit different situation, as I said, than the state parks do. Essentially that's it. Actually, the 2 gentlemen in the audience, public members here tonight, are the ones that brought this originally forward to the PRAC on behalf of CIC, and then we've remained in conversation. So I don't know if they have any additional comments about that, but that is the recommendation. So again, what I'm looking for is just your general response to this, whether it's something you'd be supportive of us doing, and if so, I would move forward, work with our attorney, put together a policy, bring it back for a formal adoption at a future commission meeting, probably in the relatively near future. Mm-hmm. Be happy to answer any questions.
Commissioner Mum.
I think it's good. I was wondering, how many spaces do we actually have down there?
We are just around 30. That's give or take a few spaces. I don't recall. You caught me at a moment of not remembering exactly, but it's just around that.
Okay, so can you kind of give me the process as to how we reserve that today? I call you and say, can I reserve a spot, or is it first come, first serve?
First come, first serve. We don't have the luxury of having the ability right now to do reservations. We don't have the staff, either office staff or at the site, to be able to deal with that. So, and it works fairly well. So it's first come, first serve. We have a self-pay station at the park, so you deposit your money in for however many nights you're going to stay, in an envelope into a lockbox. And our staff and our park hosts, the volunteer park hosts, check that to make sure that the people that are in the park are actually paid up. And actually, I'm glad you asked that, because I forgot to mention to you the way that this would work is the administration of this for us wouldn't be very burdensome, because following the state policy, State Parks has and I included this in your commission report. In the very last of the page of the attachment is an application form through State Parks. So they already have a process whereby a disabled military veteran can apply for this special pass.
Right.
We would just utilize that same pass. We wouldn't create our own. We would just say, this is available, and if you want to do this at our site, you can apply for the state's pass, or you may already have one, and then we'll have a way of administering to have that hung in the window, or have it, I think the state policy is it requires you upon check-in to write down the pass number on your registration info when you put it in the box. And then also you can display it in your window of your RV or your camper or what have you. And we would basically just piggyback on that. The state already has that system in place. It would work pretty nicely for us. So,
Good point. I was bringing that up next. How would we do that? They would fill out the application and send it in to you, or we would just...
No, we would just defer to State Parks that this process is already in place. If somebody inquired
Right.
about it to us, we would say, here's the information. You can go on the State Parks website. You can download the application. It's pretty straightforward.
Right.
And then once you've got the pass, you would be eligible. So we would just defer all of that to the State Parks pass, but let them. We would basically, to simplify it, we would honor the State Parks pass that they would be able to get for that use. Does that answer your question?
Kind of.
Okay. So we're not creating any new pass. We're just proposing to create a policy that allows us to honor the same pass that the state parks have, and the administration of that would be pretty simple, and it would still be under the first come first served basis at the site. And
Okay, that would not change.
that would not change.
Okay.
The question I have, and if we're just going to follow basically what the state does, that's fine, but how is the determination made that the person is a disabled veteran? That is there a federal designation that an individual has, or do you know that?
There's in the information actually that's in your packet, the state form, they are required to contact I think it's the Veterans Administration.
Yeah, it's the Veterans.
For the state, and then they have to
Affirm.
sign off on
Yeah,
that
okay, that's
and
And
say
Larry's going to
yes.
show you his.
This is a card that says that I'm 100% disabled, an American veteran. You produce that, and that's how you get the...
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, thanks a lot.
Great.
Okay, hey, do you want to say anything, Larry?
No.
Okay.
You've done the job.
Okay, fine. Thank you.
I think it's
you.
a great idea.
So too.
Yeah.
I think so too, and I think
I just wanted to know how the state application was going to get to the city. But
yeah,
you're just
we would
gonna
just honor
it.
their pass
Okay.
that they already produce, and that would be pretty straightforward. And I don't
Okay.
really expect any issues as far as just taking up a lot of spaces and that kind of thing. Our average occupancy rate is around 50 to 60%. It goes up and down.
Right.
There are typically spaces available. It's on a really nice summer weekend, it'll be full there, but those are more the exception than the rule, where it's completely filled. So it's
Okay.
not really a concern about having loss of revenue because of displacement of spaces. I think it's just more an opportunity to do something good for our veterans.
Well, sure. And then they would take a tour and eat in a restaurant.
Spend some money in our town.
Yeah.
And it's
So-
consistent with the state parks.
It
Yeah.
is, right.
Yeah. Great.
You got to come up.
The one thing that...
What's your name,
Introduce
Larry?
yourself. Oregon City resident.
My name is Larry Hanlon, and I live in Oregon City. Where this came to mind was I was up at the Veterans Hospital, and I'm sitting up there with a guy that had one arm and both legs gone. And he's sitting there telling me about when they used to fish down Buckman Park.
Yeah.
So we have a lot of disabled Iraq War veterans that are running around with no legs and arms.
Yeah.
And I do mean they're running around with artificial legs.
Yeah.
But you can't, you just got to look at that. We've got to do a little bit of something for those guys. And, if it got to be a problem for space, you could require a handicap parking space.
Yeah.
And have 3 of them or,
Right.
any way around that. But I think you could grow into that.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's all I have to say. Well, I appreciate you taking a hard look
And
at
we
this.
appreciate your service.
Thank you.
Yes.
So, yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I guess we're ready to go back to 3C.
Thank you,
Introduction to
Scott.
public sector bargaining, staff report, and I bet I know who's going to do the speaking.
We never hear from you, Jim.
I know. Good evening. When I get up to the big.
You got to introduce yourself and say whether you live in Oregon City or not.
Jim Leffler, Human Resources Director.
Work for the city of
I
Oregon.
work for the city.
There you go. I saved you.
The whole purpose of this presentation, we have 2 contracts open this year for negotiation, and some of the commission members, other than perhaps the mayor, may have not been, and Commissioner Smith may have not been through the public sector bargaining with the city previously, or are familiar with public sector versus private sector. There are some big differences between the public sector and private sector bargaining. So it's just an overview, and we'll take it from oops. There we go. So here's what I'd like to speak about this evening. We're going to do an overview of what we call the PECBA, which is the Public Employee Collective Bargaining Act. Talk about the bargaining timelines for both strike permitted, which is the AFSCME unit, and strike prohibited group, which is the police association. Talk briefly about current contract costs. That means the contract that's expiring, June 30th of this year. Both contracts expire June 30th of this year. And answer any questions you may have. Yes?
Well, the police are exempt from striking. Is also the fire, or do we not have a?
We don't have fire
We don't
anymore.
have anything to do with fire anymore.
It used to be when we had it.
That is a good question, because I was going to speak to all the strike prohibited
Okay.
groups. But no, the only strike prohibited group the city has is the police.
And we do not want them to do that. Thank you, Mike.
So the Public Employee Collective Bargaining Act, PECBA, Oregon Statute, Chapter 243, and those are the specific chapters. It's administered by the Employee Relations Board, or we call it the ERB. They're the enforcement arm of the state for the PECBA. 3 members on the board. There's one labor group, one labor member, one management member, and then a impartial member, I guess is how it's supposed to be established, the 3 members. Also part of the ERB are administrative law judges who their task is to review unfair labor practices and or some contract disputes that may come up from time to time. And also the state conciliation service, which consists of the mediators who come out when things break down, and I'll talk a little bit more about that here. If negotiations break down and we have to go to mediation, it's at that point that they come in, work with us, we work with both sides before we have to actually go to impasse. I provided in your packet there a timeline for both strike prohibited and strike permitted. So this speaks to the strike permitted, or the AFSCME group. Both have similarities, at least for the first slide. The first 150 days is a mandate calendar days that we are bargaining in good faith. That's the term. Both sides meet. We exchange proposals. At that point, whenever the first proposals are exchanged, that's when the 150-day clock starts. So, we're required to meet. And in good faith means that we set up meetings at times that are available to both the employees and the union employees and the management employees. It can't be on like 8 o'clock at night. It can't be on the weekends. Those type of things that would be considered bad faith bargaining. So we make it, try to make it as constructive as possible, and go for the 150 days. And then if we reach agreement before then, great, and that's the key. Sometimes we don't, and so that's why we have to sometimes get the mediator. If things are for whatever reason contentious, and during the 150 days or prior to that 150 days, we say we want a mediator, and we can request a mediator. Both sides agree, get a mediator in there, and then the mediator comes in, works for a minimum of 15 days. That's a minimum. Sometimes they work more. Sometimes they work in excess of 1 or 2 months with the groups, especially if they're making progress. But if the mediator comes in and says, "Oh boy, impasse," the mediator can in fact declare the impasse, or either side can declare impasse after at least 15 days of mediation. So after impasse is filed, at this point, both sides submit what they call their final offers and cost summaries. And those go to the mediator, those go to the Employee Relations Board, and they get published. That gives the public the right to take a look and see what the cost estimates that the city has versus what the proposals that the union has. And then we also, our final offer for strike permitted is actually the contract that we would invoke. We would like invoked if in fact it comes to that. So that's what we would give the Employee Relations Board. And then there's a 30-day cooling off period. We can still meet and discuss anytime during this point. We're still, if things are still progressing, we can still meet during the cooling off period. But if after the 30 days there's not an agreement, then the city has the right to implement that contract, that final offer, and the union has the right to strike given a 10-day notice. They have to provide a 10-day notice prior to striking. Fortunately, I don't think we've had a strike here in Oregon City. I don't plan on having one here in the near term. Yeah. But that is the worst case scenario for the strike permitted group. Going over to strike prohibited, as I guess Commissioner Munn. Yes, fire. That's right. Okay. So here we go. Fire. In the interest of public safety, the PECBA, Public Employee Collective Bargaining Act, allows for public safety groups such as fire, police, parole and probation guards, juvenile corrections, transit employees, deputy DAs, and 911 operators to be prohibited from strike. So those groups instead are allowed to go into what's called binding binding interest arbitration. That's the real difference between strike permitted and strike prohibited. Strike prohibited get binding interest arbitration. Strike permitted are allowed to strike. The problem is sometimes the arbitrators that are chosen are not even from the state. They're on a list of arbitrators that are submitted to the Employee Relations Board. And so they could come in and not be familiar with the state statutes or the state economy or any of the things that are going on within the state, and their task is to decide between two last best offers. So it's an interesting process. The top half of the timeline, as I mentioned, is similar to the strike permitted group. 150 calendar days are mandated. So we have to meet for a minimum of 150 days, or we have to meet before an impasse can be declared.
And the 150 days is not business days; it's just calendar days. Okay,
that's right. So.
Even if you come to agreement before that?
Well, no. If you reach agreement, you can reach agreement any time before that. This is the worst case where we're heading towards impasse and or mediation and or interest arbitration. So again, both sides are required to present final offers and cost summaries within 7 days of declaring an impasse. And here's the difference. The strike prohibited. We also petition the ERB, Employee Relations Board, to initiate binding interest arbitration. We have the same 30-day cooling off period. And then in that period, the arbitrator is, if both sides don't mutually agree to an arbitrator, which, if we're at impasse, the likelihood that we're going to mutually agree to an arbitrator is probably not that good either. So we have to ask the Employee Relations Board for a list of 7 arbitrators, and then we have to whittle it down, which would pick either side picks one until we get down to agree to the one. And that has to happen within 5 days. Then the arbitration hearing is scheduled when both sides present their last best offer on mandatory subjects of bargaining only. And the key here with mandatory subjects are money items, hours of work or salary, benefits. Those are what are considered mandatory subjects of bargaining. So when we talk about the costs, private sector, if anyone's familiar with public sector bargaining, it's kind of apples and oranges with public sector. Public sector, by the law, by PECBA, we're required to use comparable cities to roughly our population size, roughly our population, and similar sized jurisdictions. In our case, we use cities in the metro or I-5 corridor. Typically West Lynn, Lake Oswego, Kaiser, Albany, Tigard, Tualatin. Sometimes we use Hillsborough, as a population is a lot larger than ours, and Beaverton, as is Gresham. Those are the three. And of course, we would not use the city of Portland because they're just completely outside of our size. So what I did, I took 2 years worth of data for the current contract, and I created our Human Resource and Information System. Eden provides total cost of compensation reports, and I summarized the employee reports for 2011 and 2012, and that's effectively what the personnel costs are for the last 2 years for both the AFSCME contract and the police contract. That includes salary, benefits, PERS.
Okay.
There were some movement, like in 2011, the 3, now 4 code enforcement officers or code enforcement folks went from AFSCME to police. And then we've had some recent promotions from AFSCME into management. Not here anymore. So there have been some changes. So the numbers of AFSCME employees has dropped actually a little bit. We were in the 70s. Now we're at 68. The police they have like 54 non-sworn in the police association right now. That includes court and code enforcement.
So how many AFSCME?
68.
And how many employees do we totally have?
Well, if you represent,
FTEs.
FTEs, budgeted FTEs is about 178, Wyatt, give or take. We have about 150 benefited employees. That's management, AFSCME, and police.
Okay.
So it's 150 benefited position, 152, 153, somewhere in there. And then the other FTEs are part-time library, seasonals, pool, the lifeguards, et cetera.
Okay. Thank you.
So let's see. Anything else on that? Okay, so here's what we're looking at. Main costs, as I think Wyatt has mentioned once before, that with the new PERS rates for starting in July 1st, we're expecting a first increase of 5%, which is actually good compared to some other folks, school districts in particular. Medical insurance, we had a benefit committee meeting not too long ago, and we mentioned that we were looking at a 2-year budget, and we're hoping that we could get some crystal ball number that would be good to use for budgeting purposes, and our broker recommended or suggested 12.5%.
Now, this is is this an annual increase you're presenting?
That's correct.
Okay.
I think it's low, just so you know.
Okay.
The healthcare industry, I think it's low. But
Well, we have a trend. I've looked at 10 years of data for health insurance, and we've had some spikes here and there, but it's averaged somewhere around 10 to 15%.
Yeah.
But you're right. It's with, especially with the Patient Care Act. We don't. But again, we have to go with what our
what your broker
what
says.
the broker's saying. She hopefully knows. And what we're looking at is organization of the contract, some ambiguous language here and there, and any other concerns that may have come up by management. And before I go into any questions, one question that comes up from time to time is whether or not should elected officials be at the bargaining table. And in your packet, one of the handouts I attached is an excerpt from an LGPI, Local Government Personnel Institute, newsletter that hopefully help you decide. And basically, the mayor and the city commission they make the policy decisions for bargaining and establish the parameters. So they're responsible for the big picture and should not get involved in the contract provision wording. That's kind of micromanagement.
Yeah.
That's the labor attorney's job and mine.
Yes.
Is to negotiate, is to come up with the wording that will work for management and for the city. And also, bargaining is an adversarial process by nature. I can't recall too many times that I've walked out of a bargaining meeting and say, "Boy, that really felt good." Or,
no, I'm sure not.
Or, "Thank you, sir. May I have another?"
Yes.
That wasn't what came to mind.
No.
So, elected participation could put unreasonable pressure on the city official to make an on-the-spot decision, and that if that decision becomes part of the record, and then we get a whoops. That whoops could become an unfair labor practice.
Yes.
In other words, if we try to rescind something that was proposed, that could be regressive bargaining, and regressive bargaining is considered unfair labor practice.
Well, and this is your job, so you know it inside and out, so you should be doing it.
So what you're looking at here on this sheet here is for both AFSCME and the police union, is that right?
That's correct.
Yeah.
So, and lastly, some elected officials do receive campaign contributions from unions, and that's understandable. So there could be a perception of conflict of interest if they are, depending on what goes on in the bargaining team. So it could be. So let me see. Currently, updates as negotiations progress, and we haven't met yet. Our first AFSCME meeting is scheduled for February 27th. At that meeting, we anticipate receiving some proposals from the AFSCME group, and so that, in effect, our 150-day clock for bargaining starts on the 27th, which goes to July 29th is the 150-day. All indications are from both police and AFSCME is that they want to conclude sooner rather than later. Although without seeing what proposals are, can't say yet. I don't know, and I don't know what the costs are going to be. So they have to, and also how much we can afford. That's why I need Wyatt and Maya.
Yes, Wyatt's an important person.
That 150-day period then ends after we've already approved our budget.
Yes. Yes. See, and that's problematic too, or can be problematic. If although we would know, I would have a good idea because we require all proposals to be exchanged within the first 3 meetings. So if they come in with some proposals that are going to be very cost prohibitive, and then I would certainly come in executive session and say, we really can't afford this, and this isn't realistic, and so we're going to have to. And that's when I would get direction from the commission on how to proceed.
Okay.
And subject to your questions, that concludes my presentation.
Well, I think it was very informative. Thank you for doing this. I appreciate it.
Thanks for all your work.
So now I see no questions up on the floor, so we're going to go right on into 3D. 3D, that's not a, has nothing to do with the movie. The 3D being the agreement to Willamette Falls master planning. And I presume this is not Willamette Falls Media.
This would be Blue Heron.
Blue Heron.
You want to clarify that?
So I'm going to be presenting, providing an update on where we're at and the steps forward that we're going to be taking here over the next, very quickly, remainder of this month. So I'm going to hand out a document that we're working on right now. This is in draft form, and so let me just hand this out real quick, and I'm going to walk through this with you. So at our work session and in previous discussions that I've had with the commission, we've talked about the work that we've been doing out on the Blue Heron property. And initially, we were doing the due diligence work over the summer to look at what are the opportunities on this site. Now we're moving into that next phase of realizing that we didn't have the partnership to take down the property at this point, to work with the trustee to see if there was a way that we could start some of the public visioning and getting the land use entitlements in place on the property. And so in order to accomplish this, we've reached out to the trustee as well as our other partners, and we've been working with them to create a request for proposal for the public outreach, visioning, master plan / framework plan, and then the land use entitlement process that would go through on the property. And we felt that at this point, with where the trustee's at, it's our opinion that based on the unknown liabilities on the site, many of the unknown questions that exist there, there is some interest from the private side, but there are concerns still. And in the discussions with the trustee, we said, can we work together to try and address some of these unknowns and dealing with the entitlement process, the transportation impacts, et cetera, the things that we do well as local governments in terms of planning and long-range planning and master planning of sites. And to accomplish this, we are also working with the trustee and trying to work within some of the time parameters that he has. Right now, NRI is the company that he's consulted with to do the demolition work out on the property and the salvage work. That contract is going to run towards the end of this summer, early fall of 2013. Currently, NRI is responsible for all the costs associated with the site, maintenance, security, everything that goes along with maintaining that site. When NRI is done with their contract, the trustee will then take over the responsibility of maintaining that site, which means he is now responsible to pay the bills.
And just for the public, you might say what NRI is and what their contract is.
National Recycling International, I believe, they are the firm that was hired by the bankruptcy trustee to liquidate the valuable infrastructure on the site. So they are taking anything of value from machinery, pipes, electrical, anything on the site other than the structures at this point. That could change should the bankruptcy trustee or the court say liquidate additional assets on the property, but at this point, that's what their contract is for.
So they're taking it, they're selling it, and paying the trustee. Is that kind of, or paying the creditors, or do we not know about that?
NRI came in and paid an upfront lump sum for the whole process. So anything they're taking out of that is part of their point.
Gotcha.
Right, and as part of the sale of the ponds on the West Lynn side, as well as part of this contract with NRI, went to pay off one of the creditors, leaving Sempra as the next creditor in line on the bankruptcy.
Okay.
So in working with the trustee and trying to acknowledge these timelines, because the trustee is going to get to a point, he has limited amount of resources, monetary resources available to him. You're going to be burning through tens of thousands of dollars a month to maintain that property once he takes that over. He is comfortable getting to and committing to trying to get at least the land use process started with hearings
by April of 2014. He's willing to maintain and take on those costs from when NRI leaves the property until that date. At that point, he's going to need to make a decision. What we felt was that if we didn't engage the trustee at this point, a couple of things might happen. He could abandon the property, or he could sell, which would be good. But you're not sure who you're going to sell to. And so we felt that this was an opportunity with the funds that we had available and the resources we had available to have more input on what happens on that site in some type of a public visioning and helping with that master planning process. So I'm working with Clackamas County right now to create a memorandum of understanding, and they've committed $100,000 to this planning effort. We're making good progress on that, and at this point, everything is pointing in the direction it should be for a successful memorandum of understanding.
And they have a dedicated person that attends your meetings now?
Correct.
Okay.
Yes. As you may recall, and I'm sure you do, this commission has made a significant commitment of monetary and staff time to this process. I currently have approximately $115,000 plus another $100,000 that I'm anticipating and will be requesting on July 1st, and putting some of that money towards this visioning process as well. This collaborative agreement lays out the responsibilities of the trustee as well as the city in reaching this agreement, and make sure that the trustee brings, and he's committed $50,000 to this process. Right now, we're anticipating a minimum of $650,000 process. The remainder of that money would be through an application to the Construction Excise Tax Grant Program from Metro. They're currently entering their third cycle of that grant program, and they're anticipating somewhere between $3.4 and $3.7 million to come in for this funding cycle. And this year, they've decided that 50% of that money can go to projects inside of urban growth boundaries and inside city limits that will help facilitate and expedite potential redevelopment. So we feel that this is a prime candidate for those funds. So the remainder of that money will come from that grant request. I've actually prepared a draft for the mayor to sign. We're going to submit our letter of interest this week to Metro for that grant process, and the application for that is due roughly mid-April. And at that point, we'd be coming back with a letter for the whole commission to adopt supporting that grant process. So there's a couple of moving parts here, all of which we need to be successful with and to achieve the funding. And so there is some risk that we are taking here. I've got to get a deal with the trustee. Up until this time that we enter into a contract, the trustee could sell or abandon the property. He can sell throughout the entire process. We are working with him for additional language to try and make sure that whoever he sells it to, continues to work with us through this planning process. So the draft that you have in front of you tonight, we're still working with the trustee on, and we're going back and forth, and we just received their additional red lines right before the meeting tonight. So, but we believe we're about over 95% of the way there. So we are still doing a little bit of wordsmithing and negotiating on the final document. I'll also be bringing back the memorandum of understanding with Clackamas County. So while I'm fairly confident that we're moving in the right direction, until I have the signed documents, I will feel much more comfortable.
May I interrupt you just a moment? We have a memorandum of understanding with the Metro Regional Government now. Correct.
Yes.
So.
Yes. But that was, we've kind of got almost 2 to 3 different processes going on here. We have the original partnership, which was looking at due diligence, and there's additional work that we're going to be doing with that group. And now we have this other process that we're starting where the city is going to take the lead on in terms of the visioning and the master planning process. So that memorandum of understanding with Metro was really for the due diligence work. And here we're more entering into the planning side of Metro. So we do need to enter into a competitive grant process for that construction excise tax money. This isn't something we can enter into a memorandum of understanding and they're just going to provide the money. So we still do need to put together a competitive application.
So just to make sure, when we're talking about the partnership from this point with Metro, It's looking at the funding, getting a funding source from the construction excise tax.
Correct.
Okay.
Yes, but they will still play an integral partner in terms of technical review, assistance, so staff assistance. We're going to be working with them. We're going to be meeting with them. We've used our partnership that we've been working with all along in creating the request for proposal. We're working with them on, and actually they assisted quite heavily, working with Peter McKittrick, the bankruptcy trustee, on creating this collaborative planning agreement. So, and then the last component that's going to be out there is that we submit for the CET grant in April. We're probably not going to know until mid-May, end of May. There's going to be some paperwork, some scopes that need to get done. So it's a priority. We believe we'll have the scopes ready to go, and we'll have those agreements, so we'll be one of the first ones. But the funding on that may lag a little bit as to when they can bring the money. I will have the commitment, I just won't have the signed document. So we're going to need to bifurcate this RFP in a way to make sure that we do have those funds available to us when we need them to complete the planning process. So those are just some of the risks that on the monetary side. So going back to this agreement, so this is agreement between the city and Peter McKittrick. We'll be taking the lead, as I stated, on the planning processes. So the MOU will be with the county and us, and then this will be between the bankruptcy trustee and us. And essentially, we will be the lead for the planning process. We will be out front on this process, and they'll be serving that support role from behind. And what this essentially states on page 1, trustee owns the property. It clarifies the trustee is responsible for liquidating this property as the outcome. The zoning on the property is industrial. Comprehensive plan is general industrial. We agree that there's probably a higher and best use on that property, and that's what this process is to try to accomplish. On page 2, it talks about our comprehensive plan has a policy that says before any change of use, and I'm paraphrasing, on Blue Heron can occur, they need to go through our master planning process. So the goal of this is to have a high-level master plan, not a redevelopment plan. We're not going to say Block 2 is going to be a 4-story building with half office and half residential. This is a very high-level master plan that deals with general land uses, general locations, and tries to address the off-site impacts associated with a zone change and a comprehensive plan amendment on this property. Question?
Yes, I'm dying here, Tony. Thank you. This was very good. If I'm clear, April 2013 is when you think it's going to be the drop dead kind of date for the
14.
trustee to say yes or no?
2014.
2014.
Yes.
Thank you. I'm sorry. So, does the trustee have other people already submitted for buying the property? Do you know?
He has 2 interested parties, but they've been interested parties for quite a long time.
Okay, so he's not leaning towards picking them up.
At this point, he's willing to enter into an agreement with us to invest money into this property to try and get the entitlements in place.
Okay.
In the end, part of this acknowledges the fact that it's really up to the judge.
Yes.
The trustee makes recommendations. There could be a point where the judge comes in and says,
we're not going to do this
liquidate
anymore.
it. Yep, and that's another one of the risks associated with this.
So the $650,000 is specifically for the visioning process. Is that correct?
It is for visioning and staff time, correct?
Okay. So the visioning process, I want to make sure that...
I guess I need to clarify.
Okay.
This is for the visioning, the master plan, and the entitlement process.
Okay.
I want to clarify something. You mentioned the $650,000. That's the money that's available for projects that we get from the capital investment.
Construction excise tax?
Yeah.
50%.
Well, Right now, I have a budget that I'm projecting at a minimum of $650,000 to complete this work.
Oh, okay.
Through construction excise tax, I can request whatever money amount I want.
Okay.
That includes
Right.
can pay consultants, to put on open houses, and to pay staff time.
We just don't have a commitment at this point.
Right, I need to apply for it. still.
Right, okay.
Yes.
So, I want to go back to the visioning. This city has gone through a lot of visioning processes, and they've sat on the shelf and collected dust. So I want to make sure that this commission is willing to push forth and put money behind the vision that the community comes up for this project. So, I'm just throwing that out there.
You know what the vision's going to be? Because I'm really interested. I understand.
I don't
completely
want
where you're
to.
coming
I don't
from.
want to. You know,
Yes.
I want to make sure that we follow through.
The best way we can try to make that happen is to contemplate in here, because when you adopt a master plan, the first step, the main step that you need to take to implement it is to have zoning laws that create the outcome
Right.
that's in the vision.
Right.
And so this process includes a zone change exercise that would be a big part of implementing the vision. So I think you're a little bit protected because it's implicit that we're going to complete that phase as well.
Right.
And typically that's why plans end up on a shelf, is because there's some political or some other kind of backlash about a zone change. And here we're going to be focused on those 4 virtues, which I know we all have memorized, as part of the visioning process, and then
Okay.
trying to come up with zoning that will accomplish it.
Okay.
And I think one difference too here is, we do the Beaver Creek concept plan, and it's 450 acres
Right.
with 55 property owners of different parcel sizes and opportunities and financial considerations. This is much different than something we've historically done, where we're partnering with a private property owner for one specific piece, one 23-acre, essentially a single tax lot.
So it should be easier, is what you're telling me. Did I summarize it correctly for you, Tony?
Well, you've had a tour, right?
Throwing it out there.
Yes. So continuing on page 2, we lay out that we acknowledge that the trustee needs to take this document to the court to get their approval of the document. It won't go into effect should we approve it until the court approves this document. We're requesting City Commission approval to enter into this agreement and adopt this document. If everything moves forward as planned, we are going to bring this back next Wednesday to the Commission for requesting approval of this agreement. There are termination clauses should just acknowledging that the court has the authority to terminate, or if we can't come to agreement on the consultants that are going to be chosen for this project to do the work. On page 3, under the obligations of the city, we agree to take responsibility for this project, lead the project, but also to coordinate with the for retaining, directing, coordinating all the consultant work in preparation of those master plans, as well as the land use applications to implement what comes out of this public involvement process. We clarify that this does not agree nor obligate the City Commission or Planning Commission to approve what comes forward. We will prepare the best document we can, and then we go through the public hearing process, and you make the decision in the end. The cooperation of the trustee, he agrees to be a part of this process in all of the consultant selection. He's entitled to all of the discussions, all the emails, all the documents that are produced, and we are including him as a partner in this. Our goal is to make sure that he's informed, he's up to date. We are dealing with essentially the property owner here. So it's, like I said, this is the one little difference that we're going to see from some of these larger concepts that we've done on hundreds of acres, where we're working with someone. We're creating a partnership here to try to come up with a product here that both of us can support, as well as our community. The bottom of page 3, selection of the consultant, just describes that the trustee is going to be a part of that, that myself and the trustee need to agree on who the consultants team is going to be on this project when we go through this RFP and selection process. We're going to run it just like we do any other RFP. a selection committee. It's going to narrow it down. It's going to put the three forward. The trustee and myself are going to sit down. We're going to be a part of that process, and we're going to make a decision on who the best consultant team is for this project. The financial commitments on page 4. We're agreeing to bring a minimum of $450,000. In here it's 400. We're going back and forth. I'm not too worried about what that number is. If I don't get one of these grants, we're going to be either terminating this or rewriting it.
Right.
That we agree to bring this. It also allows us an out should I not be able to secure funding from Clackamas County or through the construction excise tax grant, that we have the right to terminate this. The trustee agrees to bring $50,000 to the process. Half of that money would be due when we sign a contract with the consultant, and the other half would be due when the product is created before we submit the land use application. We agree to indemnify the trustee for the execution of the contracts. We've had discussions that this isn't a big concern from us. We'll be running the process as the lead anyway. On page 5, we talk about the additional obligations of the trustee. Between the date of this agreement and the date when the city enters into the contract with the lead consultant, the trustee may abandon the property and terminate this agreement as permitted under the bankruptcy code. Thereafter, once we sign the contract with the consultants, the trustee agrees not to file a motion to abandon with the court until April 1st, 2014. So he's taking on, and it is a significant amount of money.
It is.
Of what he's going to need from when NRI stops through April to maintain that property and everything that goes along with that. So it's more than just the $50,000. He is making substantial commitments to maintain, operate, and secure that property. That could change in terms of he could sign a contract, but at this point he does not have one in place. The trustee agrees to maintain the property till abandonment or through May 30th, 2014. So we start to get into that time frame where he needs to make a decision at that point or have other deals in place to cover insurance, responsibility to secure the property and maintain adequate fire flow, and a reasonable electrical service to the property. The trustee agrees to provide the partners and our consultants access to the property with due notice, which we've been working under for the last almost 2 years now very successfully with the trustee and the contractors on site. Trustee agrees to participate in the master planning process, and when you may recall some previous discussions about while it's in bankruptcy, we can't change the zoning on the property without the property owner's signature. The trustee's agreeing to, when we get to that stage, he will sign the land use application.
Oh, nice.
To initiate that process. Doesn't necessarily states in here might not necessarily agree with what we're putting forward, but he will sign. And then some general provisions that aren't really relevant, pretty standard language from here on out. The one discussion that we are going back and forth on is about what happens if he does sell, because he can sell while we're going through this process, and what obligation could we put on the buyer to maintain that working relationship with us. It's a double-edged sword in terms of you don't want to be in a process or have spent a substantial amount of money, have a new property come in and say, I'm not going to sign the land use, or I'm going to pull my land use application out on a property owner. The other side of that is we may not want to work with,
Yes.
and those are the extremes. We're hoping that through the working with the trustee, that the interests that he's hearing are being represented by what he's bringing to the table and the discussions he has with us as a partner in this. So, like I said, I believe we're over 95% of the way there. There's not going to be significant changes to this. We're having some discussion about what happens in terms of transferring this to if there is a buyer. And I can understand the trustees' reluctance and concerns, so we're still working on that language. But we are anticipating to have that done. The trustee would like it to take it to the court as soon as possible and to begin this process. We are on a very tight timeline, and for multiple reasons, and one being we have a set end date essentially, that we're trying to accommodate. We believe that with the RFP, the way we're crafting it, and the money that we have available to do this, that we can meet this obligation and this timeline to accomplish this. So what we're proposing, what I'm proposing, is to bring this back to you on Wednesday. Hopefully, get that adopted. The bankruptcy trustee will take that to the court, get that adopted. We are going to continue to work on the MOU. Like I said, I think we're in a good shape there, and then it's going to come down to that construction excise tax grant. We've had several discussions with Metro. We're going to meet with them as part of this grant process to flesh out just any more clarity that they need. But we're anticipating to cut this RFP before the end of the month if we get approval from the commission on this agreement with the trustee.
Questions? Okay. Are there any potential buyers right now? I haven't heard any helicopters lately.
There's a lot of there's. I'm not sure what qualifies as potential. There are certainly folks who are interested, who are having conversations with the trustee. They've had conversations with us. But like I said, the trustee's moving forward with this proposal at this time.
Okay. What happens if the trustee abandons? What's that process?
We've had some preliminary discussions about that, but we haven't completely dove into what would be the process, who it would go to, how you would abandon a property. I would imagine that at that point, Sempra, who's the first in line in terms of lien on the property, either they've already turned it down, so that's why they're abandoning it, or they step in and take the property. Second in line is ODOE, has $1 million loan on the office building in front. I would imagine they could. I don't think they would. At that point, then I'm unclear as to exactly what happens once the taxes aren't paid for X years. Does it go to Clackamas County and then it gets auctioned off, or could someone come in and I'm not sure who they would be buying it from once it's abandoned. So I mean, we've had some preliminary discussions, but I don't know the exact answer to that.
It gets fairly complicated because there are a number of people involved in it, and any one of them could take some steps that might lead in an unknown direction. At the end of the day, if nobody wants it, it ends up with the county.
Okay. So, what's the difference between your perception of a visioning and the master plan? Is that what you were explaining with the zoning changes and stuff?
Yeah, so visioning is more of the public outreach process. Engaging the community, educating the community, getting them involved in what do you want to see here at a very high level. And then the master plan is actually codified in our code. We have a master plan process that deals with off-site impacts for infrastructure, transportation, water, sewer. Are there certain minimum requirements that we want to put on for building height or floor area ratio or parking? So we can deal with some of those. But the intent is to be very high level, to look at and really focusing on the robust public involvement process, identifying general areas of development. Like I said, this is more of what we would almost think of as a bubble diagram of land uses, and we're not going to get down to block by block building and use and height and design. That's down the road. So this is kind of the first step of taking this general community vision and try to shape it into, okay, here are the general land uses that we can get on the property, realizing we're going to have to come back and refine this again.
The reason I'm asking that is because it seems a little bit backwards to me. It seems to me like what if we do a visioning and people say, let's move NASA down here?
All right.
Are you going to include that in your master plan?
No. And that's part of the trick of working with the consultants in crafting the public engagement process, is to make sure that we are clearly identifying what the objective is here, and to focus that energy and that public participation towards what we're trying to accomplish. We're not going to get into the specific. We're not going to say you have to bring in so-and-so company on this property. Now, it could be something that, okay, we build upon and say, okay, these are type of uses that we find. This company does X. So, so that sounds like something that might be compatible in this area.
But that's where I'm getting confused is if you develop your master plan and it excludes something like NASA coming in, then do we have to go back to the drawing board and start over?
I think we're at that point. You're getting into specific uses, and there, yeah. If we set, and that's the trick, is to be specific enough to provide and be able to accomplish the comp plan amendment and the zone change, but allow enough flexibility because of the unknowns of what the private side can actually bring to that property. So it's specificity with flexibility, which is going to be what we're trying to accomplish here. But let's just say we completely missed it. Yeah, there's a way that it's not redoing everything. It's okay. We have the Willamette Falls zoning designation, and we're going to amend that to add this use.
Okay.
So,
Then my last question, what is the role of the tribes in this? Because I let you know earlier that I was contacted by the tribes yesterday, and they want to talk about an update, and I invited Tony to come with me to Grand Ronde. So I want to make sure that they're in this early.
they are, and we're preparing individual letters to each of the tribes in the region. And so we are approaching them as another government entity, but soliciting their input goes straight to the 4 values that we've had on this property, and it is essential. We have had contact with Grand Ronde since this process started, so we see them as, of course, one of the significant stakeholders in this process, and plan to engage them actively.
Okay, so will they be part of the master planning process at all, or not until visioning?
Visioning would go first, so that's the public outreach. That's reaching out to every stakeholder in this group.
Okay.
Identifying, you got the Willamette Falls Heritage Coalition, a great beginning place of which the tribes are a part of, but also that individual outreach to be able to work with their cultural resource staff members or whoever they decide they'd want us to work with. Yeah, so yes, they would be a part of this.
Okay.
We can't force them to be part of it, but as long as they want to be part of it, they have such a compelling story to tell there that we think is one of the most fascinating parts of the whole site. And we don't think anybody can tell the story quite like they can. So that's just one of the reasons why we want them involved.
And we're trying to take the approach. We've really front-loaded and created a very robust budget for the public outreach. I think we had we kind of started a new model with South End in terms of actually going to small groups, going to the school, and we're gonna replicate that model here and try to expand on that for the public outreach component of it.
That's good.
But it's going to be a little bit different potentially than what you've traditionally seen, where we're a big advisory group. It's going to be more going to the community, inviting the community in to see what we're producing and move it forward that way. But that's the intention, is to, we see this thing, and we've had these discussions before. It's not just Oregon City, it's not just Clackamas County. This is at least of significance for the state of Oregon. And how do we generate those stakeholders who are going to be champions of this project through our public outreach and engagement?
Okay, and just for your information, my mom's going through cancer and so having some issues right now. And I mentioned the blue heron to her today, and she said, "How did you get put in charge of all the blue herons?"
We only have the one that we have trained down there that show up on when the rainbow comes out. He's been very faithful.
I think it's great that we're moving forward with this. With this agreement, do we need to read through it and send you comments that we might have, or is this kind of?
I think we conceptually wanted you to be comfortable with the process.
Okay.
Tony and I have been reading it back and forth and passing it. We've all had our eyes on it at one point or another. You will get the final version.
I mean, if you read something in here that you just absolutely cannot
If you
live,
see
please
something
let
that's
me
a
know.
red flag.
Because we are, like I said, we're
Before.
past 95% negotiating this with the trustee.
Okay.
So I'd prefer to.
We'd definitely like to know before it goes
Okay.
into the packet.
Thank you.
If possible.
The first thing is, even if it's sold, our comprehensive plan says that goes through a master planning process. So no matter who the owner of the property is, it's still going to go through a visioning master planning process.
Go through a master plan process.
Master planning, not
Now-
necessarily a visionary.
Right, and master plan is a land use process that's codified in our code.
Yeah.
And we feel that, by engaging earlier with the public agencies and the public, we get to help shape this a little bit better than someone walks in with a master plan, and we have different visions.
Yes.
Right.
The other thing, you were saying, writing letters to all the tribes, and of course there are many peoples that have used the Willamette Falls as a tremendous resource. I assume it's part of some tribes' ceded territory. That is, and I presume that's the Grand Ronde. Do we know
Correct.
that?
It is correct.
Okay, because they're going to be the primary actor in this among the tribes.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. Okay, I think.
So I guess I'm just, and I realize, I apologize we weren't able to get this to you earlier to be able to review it line by line. Hopefully the concept of this sounds acceptable. We're going to continue to move forward with that. I pretty much have to have this in your packet. Nancy closes her ears by, Thursday. She'll give me tomorrow to finish this negotiation. But like I said, once we have this agreement, I'm fairly comfortable. I'm comfortable moving forward, releasing that RFP, realizing, we're going to need to do a site visit with consultants. It's going to take a little bit of a process, just based on what we're expecting in terms of interest in this property to work through that. So we need to get that started as soon as we can.
And now, as we enter our fourth hour of this study session, city manager's report, please.
Thank you.
Mayor, you might check your.
No, it's
Carol
real quick. I just
Oh,
have
I'm
to
sorry,
say,
Carol.
I'm so excited to be done with the environmental assessment and moving on to
Yeah.
this stage, and good work. I think the community's excited, and it seems to be moving on quicker than I anticipated. So
Not
Yes.
fast enough for me.
it's going to take time, but at least we're moving forward.
Yes,
so
and we've
this
gotten
is a
some very
next
good.
step.
We seem to be getting some momentum right now
Yes.
as well.
Yes,
Definitely.
I have been asked if there will be condos because I have 2 people willing to buy.
If,
really.
Commissioner Mum, if you thought it should have gone faster, you should have bought the property.
Oh, man, that's what I was missing. Thank you, Mayor.
You're welcome. City manager's report.
Thank you. The city attorney is going to be working on explanatory statements for each of the 2 measures that you refined tonight. The challenge is we'd probably prefer to have had an explanatory statement to you in a work session before it goes. So we're going to be careful that we try to really target the statement for what you need, but you don't have many chances left for wordsmithing. So when we get to the 20th, that's D-Day. And that's the day which you will also, besides these ballot measures, which you're now familiar with, will also be getting exposed. Well, in the packet, we'll have the explanatory statements by then, and you'll be exposed to those at that time. And we want to make sure that you're comfortable with those because they go in the voters pamphlet. So, also, the union. Regarding the LGPI report and the release of that I said I'd bring back to you, that's what I'm doing now. We have received advice from the city attorney, and he can expound on this if it's necessary, but we believe that the city's reason for withholding the report, our legal justification for doing so has expired because we've completed our pre-disciplinary investigation. The discipline hasn't been done yet, but we just completed the investigation, so when that expires, our ability to withhold the report we think is much eroded from where it was previously. We received notification, Jim did earlier this afternoon, that the union will be seeking an injunction to stop the release. So our position as your advisors is to suggest that the city should proceed with the release unless we receive a court order not to release it, of course, at which time we would honor the court order and not release it.
You have to follow the rules.
Yeah, and I'm going to let Bill engage with you if any of you have questions about the release and the reasons behind it.
I can give you the Nichols summary. The public records law is in favor of disclosure. It sets out specific exemptions. One of them is known as the conditional exemptions, which means documents are exempt unless the public interest favors disclosure. The withholding we've done to this point has been based on personnel actions and documents, material supporting those.
Right.
Now that there's specific AG manual discussions that while it's pending, you might want to hold it back. now that our investigation is complete, certainly for the people who are not employees, there's no longer a justification. For the people who are employees, in talking with the manager and the human resources director, we talked about, the public interest, and in particular, we looked at the general tilt towards disclosure, the amount of funds at issue, and some other things, and felt that the public interest favored disclosure. The next step is where we're communicating with the people involved and letting them know that we're likely to disclose the entire unredacted thing.
Right.
And if in fact that the union decides to challenge it, we'll do what we need. We can make our arguments that we think the public interest favors it, but there is no hard and fast rule. If you do X, you must disclose. It's really up to the court's eventual call as to what the public interest requires.
Thank you.
Right.
So just one word of caution about that. In the event that we end up releasing the report, and I would say right now, unless something happens and a court says otherwise, that will occur. We've received at least one communication from a former employee of a concern about that and potential lawsuits that could germinate from that. So I want to just remind the commissioners the report will be released, but your commentary about the report will not be released. Those are things that we shared together in executive session. Those remain in executive session. So when the report goes out, you may be queried to make comments about it, and I would just use extreme caution about that because of the possibility of exposing litigation for yourself personally or for the organization as a whole. So that's just something to keep in mind. And then I didn't intend this segue, but I'm going to be launching a new project that's consistent with the Commission's goals on the financial oversight piece that we talked about. We've been trying to assemble the right positions in our finance department with Mr. Wimmer's transition to retirement to go in and take a much more close look at all of the city's financial transactions that go way beyond what our ordinary audit would require. And we have, I don't have a particular target of interest here in mind, but I am concerned. I'll give you one example. We have a municipal court where we haven't, the city, it doesn't appear to me, has really questioned the way we've done our transactions there in any focused inquiry in many, many years, a couple of decades perhaps. And there's a fair amount of money that changes hands through municipal court, and that's just one example of a place that I want to make sure that we're using best practices, that we've had focused audit reviews and internal controls. And internal controls are sometimes things like you've got 3 employees and 2 of them are involved in handling money, and the third one is a person who basically oversees that. And an auditor will sometimes say, well, to have more internal controls, you need to add 3 more employees. Well, that's easy to do if you've got the money for the 3 employees, but many cities don't. And so they will have to come down to making a choice between better internal controls, which are better for accounting standards, and higher taxes, which aren't always better. And so cities oftentimes are put in this position where you can't meet the perfect suggestions of your audit every year. Well, the city has been doing that. We've been meeting whatever conditions, at least I can say that in the time that I've been here now, almost 3 years, every single audit recommendation that has been made, the city has tried to follow those recommendations, and we've had clean audits. I'm not just focused on the clean audits. I want to proactively go out and basically turn upside down all of our financial practices and look really closely at this. And I think this SDC experience highlights the need for doing it sooner rather than later. And to me, that accelerated something that I had already intended to do when we hired Mr. Parno, and then also when the Commission authorized the creation of the Assistant Finance Director position, which we now have filled. So they have a full plate in finance because we're going to a 2-year budget, and we're getting ready to roll it out, so they're really a busy little department right now. But to accomplish what the level of review that I need done, that I would be comfortable with, we're going to have an outside auditor help with that, CPA firm help with that. And so you will be seeing, I need to spend some money from your contingency fund, not very much, but I need to spend a portion of contingency to make that occur. And so I'll be bringing that forward to you at your next 1 or 2 commission meetings. Now, to get into more explanation tonight, I don't think I need to, but I do have a memo that I prepared. It's a page and a half for each of you. And then there's a draft press release that we'll probably be sending out, because this is a new project that we're launching from my office through the finance department, and I want the commission to know what we're doing and why we're doing it. So I'll hand that out. If any of you have questions about the project, please let me know.
So does that get sent out for RFP, or how do you select
It's a
the?
fairly, we're probably talking about $15,000, maybe a little less.
But how do you select the auditor?
Well, Mr. Parno there are some firms that are kind of specialize in forensics audits for municipal governments, and Mr. Parno has experience with one of them in particular that we're interested in. So we're just going to shop around a little bit before we actually finalize it, but we're going to need authority from the commission to proceed.
It's not an amount that necessitates going out for an RFP.
This is a very focused project.
Yeah.
We know what we want them to do, and they know what we want them to do, so we're probably going to limit the amount of paperwork that we need to do on that. So let's see, I have a couple other things. Actually, I don't. Maureen Cole has some library announcements coming up, but Maureen, do you want to talk about those, or can those go on our website, or what do you want to do? Okay. It's kind of late, so we'll...
She said, if I don't do it, William might.
Yeah, we'll give you a break because it is getting late and we have executive session.
Yes.
But there's lots of good things happening at the library, and they are on the website.
She's one of these library directors that likes to be quiet and sit in the corner.
Yeah.
I don't think so. Did you see that look?
I saw the look.
I'm not going there.
I knew I did it, too.
I'm not going there.
Okay, with this, we're going to be adjourning into an executive session. I'll hand this to you.
Oh.